I call to order the council meeting for the Regional Municipality Appeal for Thursday, April the 28th. Roll call, all present except Mayor Crombie, Councillor Gibson's on a personal matter, Mayor Jeffrey, Councillor Kovac, and all other members are present. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none then, approval of the minutes of the April 14th, 2016 Regional Council meeting. Okay. Moved by Councillor Tovey, seconded by Mayor Thompson, that the minutes of the April 14th, 2016 Regional Council meeting be approved. Any amendments? Seeing none, all in favor? Oops. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parrish. Oh, you're always one step ahead, or you try to be.
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor then of the minutes? Carried. Thank you. Approval of the. Okay.
I'm approval of
on the agenda.
Yeah.
Approval of the agenda.
I was just going to ask if we could move 7.2 to in camera. Our staff asked us yesterday because we're in the middle of negotiations with the firefighters and they want us to discuss this in camera. I don't know if that's appropriate.
We can do that. We can do that.
We can do that. Thank you.
Okay. Will you move the approve? Will you move approval of the agenda then?
Yes, I will.
Seconded by Councillor Palashi. That the agenda for April 28, 2016 Regional Council meeting include an additional communication item from Khaled Abuanam, Media and Communications Director, Arabic Cultural Club of Ontario, regarding hookah water pipe use in the region appeal to be dealt with under items related to health, item 11.2, and further that the agenda for the April 28th Regional Council meeting include an additional communication from Raja Curry, President and co-founder of Canadian Arab Institute, regarding hookah water pipe use of the region appeal to be dealt with under items related to health, item 11.3, and further that the agenda for the April 28, 2016 Regional Council meeting include an additional communication item from Dr. Hamid Slimi, Chairman, Canadian Centre for Dean Studies, Ayman Sayeda Khadija Center, regarding hookah water pipe use in the region appeal to be dealt with under items related to health, item 11.4, and further that the agenda for the April 28th Regional Council meeting include an additional communication from Harry Zayed Mawali, President of Canadian Arab Network, regarding hookah water pipe use in the region appeal to be dealt with under items related to health, item 11.5, and further that the agenda of the April 28, 2016 Regional Council meeting include an additional communication item from Bill McBain, Public Affairs and Health Equity Specialist, Heart and Stroke Foundation, regarding hookah water pipe use in the region appeal to be dealt with under items related to health, item 11.6, and further that the agenda for the April 28, 2016 Regional Council meeting be approved as amended. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. So our first item of business is actually a hearing of complaint with respect to Development Charges Act 1997, Section 20. And I just want to remind Council that this is a hearing based on an existing bylaw, and it's not a debate or discussion on the merits of the bylaw or an opportunity to change or amend the bylaw. It is simply an application of the bylaw as it exists. So I will call on then Evan Moore, Associate Lawyer, Prouse, Dash and Crouch LLP, on behalf of Marin Houston Land Corporation, to please come forward and state your case.
Thank you, Regional Chair. Members of Council, thank you. Staff, thank you for your time today. My name is Evan Moore, and I'm legal counsel for the complainant, Marin Houston Corporation. Today, we are dealing with a hearing pursuant to Section 20 of the Development Charges Act, and Marin Houston is applying under Section 20 of the Act on the grounds that the region has incorrectly or had incorrectly applied the Development Charges bylaw with respect to the property at 9446 McLaughlin Road, North Brampton. And in particular, 3 units at that property, units 6, 7, and 8. Last week, I forwarded a brief to the regional clerk, which I believe should have been in circulation to all members of council. I'm not sure, Ms. Clerk, whether we can bring that up to follow along, or whether it's in front of all the members? You do, thank you. Okay. So just by way of background, the property, I'll refer to the building at 9446 simply as the property. This is a property built in 1998, and it is currently zoned industrial, has always been zoned industrial. It is assessed and pays taxes at the industrial rate. Its tenants pay industrial rates for its leases, for the leases. It contains 29 separate units with a total ground floor area of over 150,000 square feet. Currently, the property is occupied by over 70% industrial tenants. Today, we're only dealing with 3 of the units, as I've already said, 6, 7, and 8. Those units were leased to a business, a Brampton business, called GlowZone 360. GlowZone offers glow-in-the-dark mini-putt, laser tag, arcade-type experiences to its customers and users. Minor interior permits were granted by the city when there was a conversion of the units, 6, 7, and 8, into a single space to accommodate GlowZone's business. Marin was granted the permit, the complainant was granted the permit, and development charges of over $140,000 were imposed. The city's portion, City of Brampton's portion of the DCs was just over $64,000, and the region's portion of the DCs just over $77,000. Those DCs were invoiced and paid promptly by Marin, and concurrently Marin issued this complaint before you today. Going back to the history of the specific units. Unit 6 was granted a change of use permit in August 1990 when it was changed to a commercial use for operation of a billiards hall. And that is enclosed, that change of use permit from 1990 is enclosed at Schedule C of the brief that was circulated. No development charges were imposed when that conversion occurred. With respect to Unit 7, there was a change in use granted in 1995 for a part of that unit, specifically 7A, when a martial arts studio was put in at that specific unit. That permit is enclosed at Schedule D. Important because at that time, no development charges were imposed on that conversion in 95. There was no such change in Unit 8. So Unit 8 was the only one that's always been used as the industrial basis. In 2006, the complainant entered into a lease with Metroland for Units 6 to 10 at the property. So that includes the Units 6, 7, and 8. That's the subject matter of the complaint today. And those units were used by Metroland to warehouse, sort, and distribute the newspapers and flyers that Metroland put out. Accordingly, there's a reversion back to industrial use for all of Unit 6 and all of Unit 7. No development charges are paid then. When this complaint was issued, some negotiations occurred between my office and city staff and region staff. City staff has since refunded the development charges on all of Unit 6, and a similar complaint was heard before the City of Brampton Council. And part of that recommendation by city staff at that point was to refund Unit 7A's development charges. And that recommendation was approved by City Council. City Council denied the request from the complainant to refund the charges for the balance of Unit 7 and all of Unit 8. Regional staff, similarly, based on historical use, and it seemed to have followed city's staff's lead on this, has refunded the development charges for all of Unit 6 based on its prior historical use, and has recommended the refund for Unit 7A development charges. That recommendation is subject to council's approval today. The rationale put forward by both city staff and I understand regional staff was that the prior use conversions occurred, no development charges were applied then. These units have already been used as commercial units in the past, and therefore it wouldn't be good policy, as I understand it, to recharge for development charges in these circumstances. So, as we now move, that was the backgrounder for the property, for the units, and the subject matter of this complaint. The purpose of development charges is stated specifically in the region's bylaw. That applied at the time that DCs, in this instance, were imposed. I say at the time because it's important to know that the development charges bylaw for the region was changed in October 2015, which I've highlighted in the submissions, and I'll get to later on in my oral submissions. The bylaw is found at tab E. And I'm looking at the preamble. That's tab 16 of the brief, or page 16 of the brief before you. And I'm looking at the preamble, the first whereas statement. Whereas Section 2 of the Development Charges Act authorized council of the regional corporation to enact a bylaw to impose development charges against land, and here's the key point, to pay for increased capital costs required because of increased needs for services arising from the development. Section 4 of the specific bylaw deals with when development charges are to be imposed. And that section is found at page 19 of the brief. Subsection 1, development charges are imposed against lands that are developed for a use other than an agricultural use if the development requires, and there's a list. The last one on the list is G, the issuing of a permit under the Building Code Act. And that appears to be what applies in the current situation. A minor variance permit was granted, and at that point it triggered, according to the region, the requirement under the development charges bylaw to pay development charges pursuant to Section 4. What's key about this section is that Section 4 states, development charges are imposed against lands that are developed for a use, if the development requires. Development is a specific word with a specific meaning pursuant to the bylaw. And it's defined in the bylaw under the interpretation section, Section 1, and at page 17 of the brief in front of you. Development means the construction, erection, or placing of one or more buildings or structures on land, or the making of an addition, alteration to a building or structure that has the effect of increasing the size and usability thereof, and includes redevelopments. So we have a definition of development, which also includes the term redevelopment. Redevelopment is key here because looking at what Marin did in applying for the minor variance permits to change units 6, 7, and 8 from 3 separate units to 1 big unit, they didn't increase the size or usability of the building itself, the building being 9446 McLaughlin Road. There was no change to the structure of the building itself. There was no increase in size. What there was a breakdown of walls to combine into 3 units into 1 big unit. So there is not a development pursuant to the definition. At best, what we have, and what the city applied its DCs on, was that there was a redevelopment. But what's important to know is that in the city's bylaw, there was an actual definition of the term redevelopment. In the region's bylaw, there is no definition of the term redevelopment. So two conditions apply in order for DC charges to be imposed pursuant to the bylaw. We know under sections 4, sub 1, sub G, a building permit must be issued. Check, that was done here. Second, development must have occurred. The development definition in the bylaw doesn't seem to apply here because, as I've already indicated, there was no construction, erection, placing of more buildings or structures on the land, increasing or adding to the size of the building. At best, we have is, again, some sort of redevelopment. It's our submission that, in fact, the definition of development was not met. And it's impossible to know, based on the bylaw, whether the definition of redevelopment was met, because there is no definition of redevelopment. There is an ambiguity in the bylaw, a gap in its application. And the submission of the complainant is that that gap, that ambiguity, must be resolved in favor of the person against whom the bylaw is intended to apply. Ambiguity in law is a legal issue. And I recognize that not many of us, any of us, are jurists here. I'm not a judge. I do my best to make submissions based on interpretations of law and precedents that are set. But I've never sat in a position to have to adjudicate a matter. Luckily, I leave that to individuals who are much better educated and experienced than myself. But I do rely on precedents to try and convince the jurists to rule in favor of the position that I'm taking on behalf of my clients or clients. So I am going to present a precedent that is similar in factual circumstances that was decided by the Superior Court of Ontario in relation to a bylaw applied at the City of Kingston. I apologize. I have copies that I would like to hand out, and I would just follow along. I hope that I've made enough copies. Clerk, thank you. It's a very short case. The facts are very simple. But it does deal with an ambiguity in a bylaw, and specifically the lack of a definition, a specific definition. I apologize if I didn't make enough copies.
Sir, I appreciate you presenting this to us, but maybe you could just quickly take us through the...
Sure, absolutely. I was just waiting for the signal. Thank you. All right. So this is a 2003 Superior Court decision, Rosebery versus Kingston City. The applicant, Rosebery, was a business located in Kingston. The applicant relied on sandwich boards to generate advertising for its business. The applicant, because of ongoing disputes with the city regarding the placement, size, location of the sandwich boards it was using, brought an application to the court to have the bylaw for sandwich boards declared invalid because it was vague and ambiguous. The bylaw, as I said, regulated the placement of the signs. Paragraph 3 of the decision on page 2 sets it out, what the actual bylaw language was. But the concerning point was the language shall be in a position where they abut the building adjacent to the sidewalk. The applicant was continuously being cited by the city because of the failure to place the sandwich boards in accordance with the bylaw. But the problem is that the definition of the words building and sidewalk were not in the bylaw. And at paragraph 6, 7, 8, the court does a brief analysis. Ultimately, at paragraph 8, the court says, look, this section regarding the placement of the sandwich boards is clearly uncertain. There is no definition found in the bylaw explaining what is meant by the words the building or the sidewalk or any connection between the two. And the court said the rest of the the bylaw doesn't help because there's no other explanations that can be derived from the language. What the court does then is cites at paragraph 6 the Court of Appeals decision where it said that it is expected that the bylaw creating obligations will be so explicit that a well-intentioned citizen seeking to observe the provisions of the bylaw may, from a reading of the bylaw, without enlargements of its requirement by the order of a municipal servant, be able to satisfy himself that he has complied with its requirements. My submission is that exactly. Mayor Houston, when reading the Region Appeals Development Charges bylaw, must have been able to read it and reasonably interpret it and satisfy itself as to whether or not development charges would apply. On a reading of development, it is clear that what Mayor Houston did for Units 6, 7, and 8 does not trigger the imposition of development charges. The concern we have, and the concern that I'm going to suggest the region also has and had, was that redevelopment is an ambiguous term and there is no definition for it. So we have a similar situation as the case in Rosebery, where the applicant was faced with an ambiguous bylaw where there was no definition of key terms. And in that situation, the court struck down the bylaw, that section of the bylaw, as being invalid based on uncertainty and ambiguity. As I've already indicated, and as I had highlighted in my submissions, my written submissions, the region has already identified this gap. In May 2015, the region actually went through a process of amending or instituting a new bylaw dealing with development charges, and that's found at tab F of the written submissions. And this is bylaw number 46-2015, and it's the development charges bylaw that is currently in effect at the region. If you look at section 4, we have the exact same, that's at page 32, we have the exact same language of the development charges bylaw that was in place when the complainant had to pay the development charges on the property. Again, section 4 sub 1G, the issuing of a permit triggers the payment of development charges if there's a development. So you turn to the definition of development at page 28, and it's substantially similar to the pre-existing definition of development. But the key addition is the definition of redevelopment, which is at page 30. Redevelopment means the construction, erection, or placing of one or more buildings or structures on land where all or part of the building or structure has previously been demolished on such land, which I would suggest is the normal understanding of what a redevelopment is. But then we have this additional part of the definition, or the circumstances where one or more existing buildings or structures undergoes a change of use. That is the key trigger here. And I submit that the region identified the gap in the pre-existing development charges bylaw and changed the law so that the situations with which the complainant was faced would not occur in the future. It was appropriate, it was done. And the region did what it should have done. It removed the ambiguity in the pre-existing bylaw and made it so that an individual dealing with potential development or redevelopment could understand what type of charges were being applied so that it could plan properly to invest in this region and in the cities in the region and understand exactly what expenses would be incurred. At the end of the day, the purpose of development charges is to deal with increased needs for services arising from developments in the area where the bylaw applies. The change that occurred at the property by the complainant had resulted in no increased need for services. It was simply reducing the barriers in 3 units to make 1 unit to accommodate a business that served the citizens of the region and the city of Brampton. There was no increase in the square footage of the property or the units. There was no increase for the needs of services. This was simply a property change from a distribution center to a recreational business. There was no change, and what's also important is that there was no change in zoning of the property at all. It remains industrial, it's assessed and pays taxes at the industrial rate, and the other units, 70% of them are industrial tenants. And so for these reasons, it is Mayor Houston's submission and position that it would be appropriate and proper that the development charges imposed for units 6, 7, and 8 be refunded in their entirety. Subject to any questions that members may have, those are my submissions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Palashi, for clarification.
Clarification, no, I just figured that I refer this back to staff, given the fact that this has come before us here today. They haven't had the opportunity to look at it, so I'll refer it back to the solicitor to report on a future meeting.
Councillor Palashi, there is a report before us that we're to deal with today.
Right,
and
but that's not what the delegate is asking for. The delegate is asking for something completely different than the report before us here today. They've also come before us to add something that I don't believe our staff has had an opportunity to look at or comment on.
I don't know what the wish of council is, but my suggestion would be that we do hear from our staff. They are listed as a deputation.
Okay.
And then we may possibly be able to deal with it if that's okay. So I'd ask that you stand by.
Just on Councillor Palashi's points, just 2 points. I appreciate the concern about the case law being brought before you. That is just precedent, and it's just to provide an example of situations. I trust that my friends at staff will be able to respond accordingly. The other point is I haven't seen council's or the regional staff's submissions yet, so based on those submissions that are made, I would request an opportunity to reply if I deem appropriate and required.
Okay, like I said, I'd ask that you stand by.
Okay, thank you.
I'll call on our staff then to come forward. I believe Dave Bingham and Rob McIver, yeah, our legal counsel.
Yeah, it was released last Friday.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Chair Dale and members of council, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about item 5.2 on the agenda. In regards to that, Rob McIver and I do have a brief presentation for you regarding this. The agenda for our presentation is to consider the complaint received by Marion Huston Land Corporation under Section 20 and as well as recommendations from the report. As outlined by the chair, Section 20 hearing for council, you can look at the amount, whether the amount of the development charge was incorrectly determined, whether a credit for DCs was incorrectly determined and applied, and whether there was an error in the application of the bylaw. Council may then either dismiss the complaint or rectify the error. Per the report to council, staff are recommending that $7,674.78 plus interest be refunded to the complainant for part of Unit 7 and that the balance of the complaint be dismissed. I won't spend a lot of time on the next couple of slides on background because they've been covered by the complainant in his submission, and legal counsel submission. So I'll just very quickly go through those rather than go over them in detail. Here's a map showing location of the property in Brampton, and at this point I'll turn it over to Mr. McIver.
Good afternoon, Chair Dale and Regional Council. And I think Dave has already indicated that there doesn't, in my view, there's no disagreement with the region staff and the complainant as to the facts and the circumstances. But rather, the disagreement relates to the interpretation of the region's bylaw 79/2012. So what I intend to do is to recite my understanding of each of the individual grounds of the complaint and provide what, in my submission, is a full and complete answer that establishes that staff have legally and properly applied the bylaw and that the amount of the development charges recommended by staff to be imposed is the correct amount. On the grounds of the predominant use of the property, the complainant has submitted that the commercial units are part of a wider development that has predominantly industrial uses, and therefore the applicable rate under the DC bylaw should be the industrial rate. Section 5, subsection 5 of the bylaw, the Regent's bylaw, very clearly provides that the commercial rate applies to the commercial component of a mixed-use building. Indeed, the only reason the bylaw introduces the concept of a mixed-use building is for the purpose of apportioning different development charge rates to each component of a mixed use. Contrary to the complainant's assertion, it is clear from the bylaw that council's intention was to differentiate between uses within the same building and to charge different rates accordingly. On the ground of the previous commercial use, Section 10 of the bylaw provides for a development charge credit where redevelopment occurs. And pursuant to that section, the amount of the credit is determined according to the pre-existing uses. If the pre-existing use is industrial, the amount of the credit is calculated according to the industrial rate. If the pre-existing use is commercial, the amount of the credit is calculated according to the commercial rate. In the case of the subject property, 3 units have been redeveloped. It's been confirmed that the entirety of Unit 6 and a portion of Unit 7 have had a historical commercial use. And on that basis, staff have already applied a credit at the commercial rate to Unit 6, and it is the staff recommendation that a credit be provided to the complainant at the commercial rate for that portion of Unit 7 confirmed to have had a previous commercial use. For the remainder of Unit 7 and the entirety of Unit 8, the complainant has alleged no historical commercial use, but only a former industrial use. And accordingly, the bylaw provides that a credit is available for those areas at the industrial rate, which is the rate that staff have utilized. On the ground of the increase in demand for service, the complainant submits that there is no increased demand for services associated with the conversion of an industrial building to a commercial one. Firstly, I would reply that this is not a legitimate grounds of complaint, as it does not fall within the scope of Section 20 of the Development Charges Act. Alternatively, I would respectfully submit that the higher servicing costs associated with commercial development was well established in the background study that the region was required to undertake in support of the bylaw when it was enacted in 2012. On the ground of change of use and redevelopment, in the written submissions from the complainant's legal counsel, an argument is advanced that the bylaw does not authorize the imposition of a development charge upon the occurrence of a change of use, and that no development has occurred within the meaning of the bylaw. Section 4, subsection 1 of the bylaw provides that development charges are imposed against land if the development requires any one of a number of approvals. In this case, there are two such triggers that are operative. One is the approval of a minor variance under Section 45 of the Planning Act, and the second one is the issuance of a building permit. Development, according to the bylaw, means the construction, erection, or placing of one or more buildings or structures on land, or the making of an addition or alteration to a building or structure that has the effect of increasing the size or usability, and that includes redevelopment. So two issues are raised here. One, has the alteration had the effect of increasing the usability of the building? And two, has redevelopment occurred? The answer to either one of these issues is affirmative. Then according to the bylaw, development has occurred and the imposition of a development charge is authorized. And I would submit to you that the answer is affirmative to both of these issues. The use of the units as a place of commercial recreation is not permitted as of right. The complainant was required to apply to the City of Brampton, for a minor variance to alter the zoning so that commercial recreation would be a permitted use. The city approved the minor variance subject to conditions on March 3rd, 2015. It's undeniable in my submission that there has been an increase in the usability of the units as a result of the minor variance. There's also no doubt that the commercial recreational use positions the units in a different category of development under the region's DC bylaw. As a distribution center, the unit's former use, it satisfied the definition of an industrial use, but the current use does not. According to the bylaw, where there's been an increase in usability, development has occurred and development charges are authorized. Legal counsel for the complainant in his submissions has deliberately omitted discussion of the provision in the bylaw that captures an increase in usability within the definition of development, and in doing so has misrepresented that definition. In written submissions, the complainant's legal counsel has cited the absence from the bylaw of an express definition as support for the conclusion that the term redevelopment is therefore void and inoperative. In my respectful view, there is insufficient legal authority for that conclusion. There are many words that do not receive an express definition in legislation. And in fact, not only does the term redevelopment go undefined in the region's bylaw, but it goes undefined in the Development Charges Act itself. My friend has provided you with a decision of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. In my submission to you, in these instances, the law, as enunciated by the Supreme Court of Canada, in cases such as Rizzo and Rizzo Shoes Limited, provides that the words of a legislative text must be read in their entire context and in the grammatical and ordinary sense harmoniously with the scheme of the legislation. The words of a legislative text must also be read so as to promote the purpose of the legislation and avoid unintended, undesirable consequences. Where there is ambiguity, there is a presumption in favor of the ordinary meaning of a word. That is from the Supreme Court of Canada. The region is enabled by the Provincial Development Charges Act to pass bylaws to impose development charges in response to an increased demand for services. Section 6 of the Development Charges Act requires that such bylaws include an explanation of how the rules for determining if a development charge is payable apply to redevelopment. In adherence to the Act, Section 10 of the Region's bylaw clearly states that the rules applicable to development also apply to redevelopment. Although there is no express definition of redevelopment found in the Development Charges Act or in the Region's bylaw, the ordinary meaning of redevelopment is simply development that occurs on a site where previous development existed. Section 10 of the bylaw goes on to grant credit for redevelopment, but where the redevelopment exceeds the pre-existing development in terms of its area or usability, the proportional increase will still attract a development charge. The complainant is urging upon council an interpretation of the bylaw that would forbid the region from imposing charges on redevelopment and that would impair the region's ability to differentiate between different forms of development and the corresponding differences in the increase of demand for services. The complainant's interpretation is not consistent with the intent and scheme of the bylaw and would indeed frustrate that scheme and purpose. Accordingly, I submit that it is an implausible and incorrect interpretation. The correct interpretation, in my view, is the one advanced by staff, that redevelopment has plainly occurred, that development charges should be imposed, and that the complainant should be credited for the pre-existing commercial uses where they exist, and for pre-existing industrial uses where there are no pre-existing commercial uses. This interpretation is consistent with the legislative purpose and intent of the bylaw, and will avoid unintended, undesirable consequences. Finally, in some of the earlier correspondence, there was a complainant had invoked Section 7 of the bylaw that provides for the application of the industrial rate in the instance of an undetermined use, but I'd submit that in this situation, the use is clearly and specifically known, and that the undetermined use section of the bylaw is not relevant. So in summary, it's my respectful submission that each of the grounds of the complaint is demonstratively unjustified, and each should therefore be dismissed. The development charges imposed against Unit 7 should be partially refunded in recognition of the previous commercial use as recommended by finance staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. McIver, you've heard the submission from the lawyer on behalf of his client with respect to this matter, and we've also heard your explanation as well. And I would just ask that, based on the recommendation that's before us and based on the evidence that's been presented to us today, you would stand behind this recommendation and that you wouldn't look at making any changes to this recommendation as it is before us?
I support that recommendation without any hesitation at all.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Sprovieri.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a bit of a clarification, if I could ask some questions. First of all, is this, depending on the decision of council, is it, can it be appealed, or is this it? This is where it ends today?
Through the chair, there is an appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board if the complainant is dissatisfied with the result here.
Okay. The other question I have through the chair is, and I understand we have industrial rates, DC rates, and commercial rates. The commercial are much higher. I don't have the figures right. If they're double or almost or more than double, can you?
I don't have the most recent rates, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. At the time of the passing of Bylaw 46 in October, the industrial rates that would apply in Brampton were $134.06 per square meter, and the commercial rates were $199.12. The difference between them, both the water supply and wastewater components were exactly the same. The difference was the regional road.
Okay. So can I ask, if worst case scenario, if the commercial if the commercial rate, if it could be argued that it doesn't apply, would the industrial rate apply to the redevelopment that occurred?
The industrial rate would apply, Councillor, but then they get a credit for the industrial rate that was previously, the industrial use that previously existed, so the net impact would be zero.
But I
The
believe
way the bylaw works is you look at the use, you apply the rate that is in effect for that, and then get a credit for the previous use at the current rate. And that's what was applied to this property was the difference between the commercial and industrial rates.
Oh, it's a difference.
It's the difference.
Okay, that clarifies it. And what about the change of the bylaw in 2015, was mentioned by the presenter? Was there a reason, was it connected to this issue?
We do take advantage of every update to the bylaw to go back through and look at all of the components of the bylaw. We look at the area municipalities, what's in their definitions. We look at area that's around us and what is in their bylaws. And where there is an opportunity to either clean up or clarify things, we do that. We've done that with, for example, with the worship area and other parts of the bylaw.
Okay. And finally, through the chair, the commercial rates are higher because there's a greater usage of commercial property than industrial property. Is that the reason why there's a difference?
It's related to the use of the regional road service. So some time ago, it wasn't a Section 20 complaint, it was actually an appeal of the region's DC bylaw. There was an appeal of that bylaw, and as a result of that appeal, there was the creation of the industrial rate with a discount on the transportation side that recognized that a lot of the industrial use of regional road was on off-peak hours. So that affected the level of service that would be needed to provide for industrial purposes.
Okay.
In this case, because it's commercial, the off-peak wouldn't apply.
I understand that. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I would just suggest, in reference to Councillor Paleshi's earlier comment, which I respect, and based on the comments that you've just made, that legal counsel's just made, I think it's clear that you're standing behind this position after hearing all the evidence. And I think we should proceed with someone bringing forward, we'll bring forward rather 5.2, and someone either moving and seconding the recommendation.
At the nerve here. Who's there as a representative?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I might interrupt.
Yeah, please do.
Mr. Moore did request an opportunity to reply, if so advised. Because this is a hearing, that's actually an entitlement that he has. So he should be afforded that opportunity.
Before I respond to that, Councillor Sprovieri, did you have, okay. By all means, if he wishes, and that's an oversight on my part, but I would ask that it be very, very brief and that he doesn't reiterate the comments or statements that he previously made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, the minor variance application was not for a permitted change of use. It was dealing with parking spaces. It had nothing to do with the change in use that my friend alleged. Those are my brief reply comments. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I suggest then that we bring forward 5.2. I don't know. Do I have a mover on the recommendation? Councillor Yannicka, and seconded by Mayor Jeffrey. All in favor then? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And thank you to the deputies. Our next delegation then this afternoon is Michael Purley, Director of Ontario Campaign for Action on Tobacco, regarding proposed bylaw to regulate water pipe smoking in the region of Peel. And these are related to items 10.1 and 11.1 and bylaw 30-2016. Mr. Perley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. It's nice to be before you again on a tobacco-related matter. Peel is setting the standard for lowest smoking prevalence as a health unit area in Ontario. So it's not surprising that more leadership is being shown here, and we're very appreciative of the steps you're taking. These are the partners of our campaign, the Cancer Society, Heart and Stroke Foundation, Non-Smokers' Rights, and the Ontario Medical Association. We've been working on tobacco control since '92 together. So vis-a-vis use of water pipe or hookah in Peel region, this is the result of the oversampling of the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey. Data from that survey specifically regarding Peel was looked at specially for this consideration of this issue, and 1 in 10 grade 7 to 12 students were found to be using water pipes, which is a pretty high number. Key health concerns, and you'll hear more from Dr. Ference in a moment on this, but some of the more striking concerns are that one water pipe smoking session can expose users to 125 times the smoke volume and more toxins than in a single cigarette. And some of these sessions can go on to the point where the equivalent being smoked is close to a pack of cigarettes in one sitting of a couple of hours. Increasingly, and this is something that struck our members particularly, water pipe smoking is increasingly the first smoking experience that many young people have rather than cigarettes. And they may in turn be more likely to turn to cigarettes once they have this initial experience. And the most recent data, which was just published about a month ago, is that even light water pipe smoking use can cause lung abnormalities. This is not a health issue that's restricted to heavy users by any means. There are a couple of myths. Well, there are a number of myths around in the community about water pipe smoking. One is that it's less harmful than cigarette smoking, partially because perhaps the smoke's filtered through water in the device or what have you. This is not true. Research, and again, Dr. Ference will speak to this in more detail, both herbal and non-herbal product, shisha, in water pipes when it's combusted produces as many and in some cases more toxins than tobacco combustion just by itself in cigarettes. So this is a very dangerous practice. And then the other myth that's particularly pervasive is that somehow smoking shisha in a water pipe that does not have tobacco in it is harmless or much less harmful than tobacco. And the latest research, in fact, this is from 2012, but there have been studies since then. There are substantial amounts of toxicants in non-tobacco-based shisha. They are sometimes different from those in tobacco, but they're equally dangerous. This is the cover of a recent edition of Tobacco Control, the international journal covering tobacco control issues, published by the British Medical Association. And it covered increased water pipe use in terms of being a global epidemic. So it's not unique to Canada, not unique to GTA, Peel region at all. This is an international phenomenon that is very serious and has attracted great and concerned attention from the medical community internationally. What is the context in which your bylaw is being considered? Well, if you look at many of the international jurisdictions where this has been a product and a practice in use for many years, you can see, and I won't summarize them all, but there are a number of jurisdictions which have enacted pretty strict controls, if not outright banned the use of hookah shisha. Turkey in 2013 is one where there is no hookah use permitted in cafes, bars, or restaurants, so very much in line with what you're considering doing here. And finally, the argument is sometimes made that hookah use is a cultural practice. And Vancouver put in place a bylaw eliminating hookah shisha use in public places and was challenged on this basis. And the judge rejected it because in two senses, the bylaw did not interfere with water pipe smoking at home. This was only in public places where others would be exposed to secondhand smoke. And water pipe smoking in public places like cafes or bars was carried on for profit. So, in other words, no relationship to a cultural practice. Thank you very much for taking some time to listen to our submissions, and be pleased to answer any questions.
Yes, if you'd stay in place, I have Mayor Crombie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd love to move the recommendation at the appropriate time, too, if possible. Thank you for coming forward today. I actually asked our medical officer of health to look at this issue because they were moving on it in the City of Toronto. And the City of Toronto's bylaw is a little bit different because it prohibits in licensed establishments, prohibited in licensed establishments only. Do you have any idea why that wasn't a wider ban?
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor. This approach that Toronto adopted was started at the beginning of the was chosen at the beginning of their process for reasons that I think had to do with concerns about enforcement. So you'd have a situation where bylaw enforcement officers and licensing control personnel would be able to enforce it. So it was, I think, thought of before the health issue was really debated at council. I think it was approached on a licensed premises basis for that reason. It doesn't cover every possible public premises, so it's a little more limited than what you're doing. I think the Peel approach is more comprehensive and will be more effective.
I'll ask our medical officer later about our approach and how it differs. Just one more thing. So we understood that, well, at least the myth, as you pointed out, was that the substance in the water pipe was safer because it was herbal. But then we found through the research that had been done that it's often usually tobacco and not an herbal substance. Would you concur? Is that true? And you've shown us that even if it is herbal matter, it's just as dangerous.
Yes, I think on those two bases, the herbal matter is just as dangerous, and as you'll hear from Dr. Ference in a moment, some tests done in water pipe cafes in Toronto showed that despite the allegation that herbal product was being used, there was a great deal of tobacco smoke in the premises, and this is a pretty common practice, that the assertion is made we're just using herbal, but then when the smell test is applied or when tests are performed, it usually turns out it's more often tobacco than not.
That's what I heard as well. And then there's the effects of the secondhand smoke. Are there establishments that offer sort of a segregated area away from families and individuals to smoke the water pipe? Is that acceptable to your organization?
No, we went through many years of evaluation of various ventilation scenarios when we did the smoke-free bylaws. We even had the wind tunnel at the University of Western Ontario conduct tests to see if we could construct a room which would not allow tobacco smoke to escape when the door was opened.
Right.
And what would have been required in terms of pressurization and insulation was so expensive that it was dismissed. The only premises that allows the construction of so-called controlled smoking areas under provincial legislation at the moment, the only place they can be done are in long-term care facilities, and they have to be done according to very strict engineering standards, and they're extremely expensive. So there's no way that this would be practical, even if it were tried.
Is there any difference between, my colleague here and I were discussing vaping and e-cigarettes. Are they different or are they the same? Is this something we should be considering including?
No, they're quite well, the province is going to enact regulations shortly that will prohibit indoor vaping anywhere where smoking is taking place, and in a few outdoor settings as well. E-cigarettes are quite different from combustible tobacco cigarettes. They produce a vapor which essentially is composed of water and some flavoring ingredients, and often nicotine. And there's debate in the medical community about the direct health effects of nicotine exposure. There's emerging evidence that there are some health effects, although by no means as severe as cigarettes themselves. But nicotine by itself in e-cigarette vapor may be problematic for some people if they're exposed indoors, but it's a very different, there's no combustion involved. It's a very different phenomenon. It's less toxic by any measure than either herbal shisha, non-herbal shisha, that is tobacco-based, or cigarettes. Okay. So it's not something that I would recommend including in this bylaw.
Okay. In your mind, is there any difference than the effects of tobacco on individuals in the area around people ingesting the shisha?
Is there a difference between just purely tobacco and then shisha with or without tobacco? Not that are significant, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sato.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you, Michael. If I recall, you were very helpful to us here at the Region of Peel back when we passed our first secondhand smoke bylaw, and you're still working on this. Back then, one of the things that we really were promoting, besides being one of the first regions to ban smoking in public places, was urging the province and really lobbying the province to pass the bylaw provincially, because all we heard, and you'll recall back then, all we heard was that we were creating an unlevel playing field. Mm-hmm. And we heard that from the restaurants, from the bars, from particularly the restaurants and the bars, that their customers would go to Oakville and other municipalities and into Toronto, because we were the first region to pass the bylaw. I guess what I find missing in here, and I'd like to know what you're doing on this, is this is an issue that I think we're going to get the same reaction as we got from the smoking bylaw that we brought in place. And I would expect that. This is something that should be done provincially. The province, I have to say, has stepped forward. Various health ministers over the years have responded very responsibly and have gone beyond what we did. But we always seem to be the first ones out the door, and so of course we're the ones that get yelled at by the businesses. But and that's not a problem. I'm fully prepared to support this today, but I do think that this should be provincial, and that we really should be pushing the province to initiate or enact the regulations province-wide that we are, I assume, going to do today. So what is the action on that side of things from your perspective, and what do you see the province moving on this one?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Sato, nice to see you again as well. Yeah. I think I have good news on this front. You'll remember before Christmas, perhaps, that there was a bit of controversy about some regulations the province was proposing to put in place, which would, in fact, have allowed the vaping and smoking of medical marijuana in indoor places, which created a fair bit of controversy. Those regs were sent back to the drawing board, and the instruction that the ministry had was to make sure that there would be no vaping or smoking of medical marijuana in public places or workplaces. The result of that is a bill before the legislature now that has gone through second reading, Bill 178. And what it does is change the definition of what the Smoke-Free Ontario Act regulates from, and the quote is, the smoking or holding of lighted tobacco, to the smoking or holding of prescribed products and substances. What that does is allow broadening of the definition to include marijuana. But it also indirectly allows shisha, either herbal or non-herbal, to be regulated. The minister, the Associate Minister of Health, Ms. DeMarla, has not made a public statement about being willing to use that new definition that's expanded to regulate hookah shisha, but it's our understanding from staff that she's very interested in doing that. So since the definition allows for that, we will be, as soon as the current regulatory consultation is, well, it's finished. It finished, I guess, Monday. as soon as that's done, as soon as the new regulations regarding smoking and vaping of medical marijuana and use of e-cigarettes are promulgated, which should be within the next month, we will be going right back to the minister and saying, fine, now let's expand the use of that definition to include hookah shisha province-wide. And we have significant hopes that she'll look on that favorably. So that's where we are at the moment.
Good. I would suggest then, and if Mayor Crombie would agree as the mover, to amend the motion to add a fourth paragraph that does refer it to the ministry, and that Regional Council urges the ministry to include this in the regulations when they come forward, when the regs come out, that be included. I think it's very important that that we continue to press the ministry and the province to initiate this province-wide.
I would agree. That would be very helpful. I think Peel taking the leadership it's planning to take after the City of Toronto has done a slightly more limited approach. In this case, we have a situation where, as far as we know, the number of establishments is not uniquely they're not uniquely in the GTA, but there are many, many fewer of them than, of course, bars and restaurants were. So
Yeah.
Peel, Toronto, and then hopefully at some approximate date, York Region, if they were all to act together or at roughly the same time, we would be addressing the large majority of establishments as well as Ottawa. So any reference to the province using that definition as a next step to do this province-wide would be helpful, but we would still have already covered most of the places that are in the province.
Right, okay, thank you. So I would ask if staff could prepare the proper wording, and the mayor would agree. Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, thank you for that. Dr. Davila, did you wish to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to suggest that we add that, make that addition to our motion as well. Council may recall that at the meeting on the 14th of April, we actually discussed the new amendments to the Smoke-Free Ontario Act and the E-Cigarettes Act, or the proposed legislation that Mr. Perley has just mentioned. And Council, in fact, did endorse us putting forward a position and encouraging the province to go ahead with its proposed legislation.
Okay, thank you. And I now have Councillor Starr.
Question to the deputant, but I saw the correspondence that came in, and I had the opportunity to, once I knew this report was coming forward, there are some, I guess, operations or facilities that have been spending quite a bit of money to make sure that they are isolated. And I know in Mississauga, I've seen a couple of them, and you wouldn't know they're even there. They have spent a lot of money, and I'm just wondering, when we talk about the letters that we've got from a number of the, I guess, the other side, is there a transition period, and what did the staff come up with? And I saw the enforcement time, but for, I guess, from a fairness and an equitable viewpoint, some of these folks, have put their life savings into something that was either legal or non-legal at one point.
Councillor Starr, I'm just going to suggest, we have two other deputants, and I'm going to bring this item forward, and I would suggest that that in debate, we can, when we're dealing with this item, that could be clarified. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you, sir, for your deputation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of council.
She went off. Roberta Ferenc, Senior Scientific Advisor, Ontario Tobacco Research Unit, University of Toronto. Is she in the audience? Please come forward. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be here in support of a bylaw that's being proposed. I've been involved in research on secondhand smoke for about 25 years and on water pipe for about 8 years. And I was involved as an expert witness, although I wasn't quite as expert at the time, in the Vancouver case. I have circulated my deputation, which has more detail, and I'll have time to raised today, so I'll just focus on the main points, and thanks to Michael, who's raised some of them already. The first point is that hookah smoke is very toxic. It has everything that cigarette smoke has in it, plus about 3 times the carbon monoxide, more benzene, which causes cancer, and other contaminants. One of the reasons for this is that you're burning charcoal. We all know you don't barbecue indoors, but that's basically part of what's happening. So you have the burning tobacco. It's not burning quite the way it does in a cigarette, but there is a sort of slow burning going on, as well as the charcoal is burning as well. So that's that's the main reason you get all these additional toxicants. And the biggest point is, except for nicotine, as Michael has mentioned, there's no difference really in the toxicity of tobacco and herbal hookah smoke. It's really just an anomaly that at the time the Smoke-Free Ontario Act and other bylaws were passed, there wasn't much research on herbal products. It took time to do that. And when I was an expert witness, there was 1 paper on the topic, and it wasn't published yet. So they gave me a rough time because of that. But since that time, there's quite a large amount of literature. The health effects are all the ones that you get with tobacco, plus, as I said, 3 times the CO, which affects, heart and breathing and other things, more benzene, and a number of infectious diseases. There isn't as much sharing of mouthpieces now, but there's still the tubes and the water, which actually breeds all kinds of things. So it's pretty bad. Meningitis, TB, hepatitis, these are some of the diseases associated. And nicotine, there's a new report out today from the British folks, physicians, and saying that e-cigarettes are great and saying nicotine is no worse than caffeine, and this isn't true. There's lots of evidence now on very serious harms for the fetus, adolescent brain development, and a number of other issues. So whether or not it has nicotine, but it's also still toxic. So in 2012, we felt the need to do a local study, which we did in Toronto, of water pipe cafes, and we did them in different parts of the city. And we wanted to see what levels of particulates and carbon monoxide that we'd find, and nicotine that we would find in these different cafes. And the ministry funded this study, and they were actually interested in finding out, were they serving nicotine? At least half of the venues, of the 12 venues that we studied 12 indoor and 5 outdoor, at least half of them had air nicotine levels that were higher than what you'd get in a smoky bar. And these are people who said they were only serving herbal. So that was a problem. And the rest all showed some evidence of nicotine. The particulate levels are really beyond belief. They're not just high. Like anything above 91, it's a complicated measure. But anyway, 91 is considered hazardous. And a really bad day in a very polluted city is, 300 to 500. Well, we found levels as high as 17,000 in hookah bars, where it's like being in a forest fire. You can't really breathe in there. Some of these levels, some of the CO levels exceeded the occupational health and safety workplace regulations in the province. And non-smokers are exposed to high levels of the secondhand smoke. Our staff spent 2 hours in these places, and after 2 hours, these were all non-smokers, they had levels of CO equal to those of a regular smoker. And even outdoors, we found hazardous levels of particulates. Not as bad, but they're on. And if people were smoking outdoors only, then you would get a lot higher levels on patios and so forth. So the implications, as I mentioned, the exemption of herbal hookah is really an anomaly that happened because we didn't have enough data at the time. It already convenes provincial regulations. Wait staff are a huge concern because a lot of them are exposed 8 hours a day. It's not just somebody going in for an hour or two. And a lot of them are young people who are going to end up with serious health problems. This may also expose municipalities to liability for job-related damage to health. And we have a precedent in this with Heather Crow, who traveled the country because she got lung cancer and she died. And she never smoked. And she was exposed to a lot of smoke in an Ottawa restaurant for many years. The other thing is there's often families, there are children living in these buildings, there are tenants upstairs. All of these, smoke is a gas, and all of these people are being exposed. And that's another, and they're being exposed to very high levels, higher than you'd get with indoor smoking facilities. So I think I've made all my main points. I just think that this is a very urgent matter. As Michael said, many countries in where hookah has been traditionally used. Let me make a final point that what is being smoked most of the time is not traditional hookah. It's highly flavored hookah. The epidemic started in Syria 25 years ago, and we found a few cases where they were serving traditional hookah, but most of this is highly flavored, and we don't even know all the effects of flavored products. We know that some of them are quite toxic, and so there may be additional things that we're missing, but I think the evidence is strong enough to move forward. Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming forward today with your presentation. I don't see anybody on the list, so thank you very much. Our next deputant with respect to this item is Chris Ciccato, Provincial Manager, Government Relations and Public Affairs, Ontario Lung Association. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Regional Chair, Councillors, Worships. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. Like the Chair had said, my name is Chris Ciccato. I'm Provincial Manager of Government Relations and Public Affairs for the Ontario Lung Association. I'm here today as a representative of the Lung Association, which supports the recommendations calling for the prohibition of hookah use in licensed establishments, areas that include enclosed public workplaces, restaurant, playgrounds, schools, etc., etc. I hope to use this opportunity today to emphasize that unregulated hookah establishments are undermining the good work in supporting a truly smoke-free Ontario. Also highlight water pipes' rising popularity, the direct and indirect health impacts, and what others are doing to address this. While here today, as a representative of the Lung Association, I also have a vested interest in this issue. I used to work as a bartender back in the days to pay for school, etc., and we would always go out and take fresh air breaks. And I remember always coming home smelling of smoke, and I cringed to think about the potential impacts on my lungs during those working conditions. And when legislation was passed to ban smoking, it was a relief. And you know what? The restaurant industry actually stayed strong. And we have a great restaurant industry in this province. I was appalled that workers in establishments are still facing these same hazardous conditions today. We faced these challenges before and seen the impact on workers in those establishments, and yet the issue is creeping up again, just in another form. We've done an incredible job regulating and protecting citizens from exposure related to cigarette smoke, and hookah establishments remain a glaring gap. 10 years ago, the World Health Organization identified water pipe use as a serious potential health hazard. Contains nicotine, carbon monoxide, carcinogens, and may contain greater amounts of tar and heavy metals than cigarette smoke. This smoke is delivered in heavy doses. In a typical hookah session, a user typically consumes about 100 to 200 times the volume of smoke compared to a cigarette. There's a real need for widespread public education on the issue as well to dispel myths around hookah effects. There's a widespread misconception that hookah is safe, especially among young people where it is rising in popularity. Enticing flavors like white gummy bear, pineapple, and double apple are a draw for the young crowd. In fact, a recent OTRU, Ontario Tobacco Research Unit report, I believe you may have had a copy submitted in front of you, found that there has been a rise in hookah use, as Michael Perley had indicated. In 2006, 6% of 15 to 19-year-olds had used hookah and 11% of 20 to 25. As of 2013, these numbers have risen to 14% and 29% respectively. That means there's almost a third of young adults in Canada using hookah, and its popularity may be in part due to the fact that it's often used as social activity, which poses additional health concerns beyond inhaled smoke. A single mouthpiece is often used and can increase the risk of transmitting communicable diseases. I won't go into naming those, but tuberculosis is one, hepatitis. The effects of hookah do not stop at the individual user, but poses significant air quality concerns. Carbon monoxide levels inside hookah cafes have been found to be 89 times higher than outdoors, and spending 2 hours in a hookah cafe is equivalent to smoking 10 cigarettes. Additionally, the exposure to fine particulate matter, which is inhaled deep into the lungs, is alarmingly high. Ontario's air quality index indicates that measures over a 91 micrograms per cubic meter of air have possible serious respiratory effects. In Toronto, prior to the ban, you could walk in a hookah establishment, pick your flavor, and smoke indoors. This is one area where we were failing to protect workers, the general public, the youth, from exposure to serious health effects. Significant progress has been made worldwide. Mr. Perley had shown Middle Eastern countries, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey have all enacted bans or restrictions on hookah. In Canada, about 3 provinces, I believe, Alberta, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, and over 11 municipalities are regulating the use of hookah. I think Ottawa had may have just completed theirs. I kind of lost track, but Toronto and the province of Ontario and even Mississauga have been leaders in taking progressive steps to ensure the next generation doesn't smoke, and including in Ontario the recent passage of Bill 45. So the absence of any regulation on hookah use, however, undermines this progress, and it's critical that Peel, a world-class community, continues to assert itself as a leader in protecting the health of its citizens through supporting these prohibitions in certain places. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have one councillor on the list, Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much for coming. And I guess I just want to, perhaps from our medical officer as well as yourself, have a discussion about the smoking of hookah. And I do understand the health concerns, but seeing as our federal government is going to be legalizing marijuana, and I'm kind of looking into the future and saying, are we going to have a list of deputants here coming in and saying, every municipality or regional government has got to, make a stance and pass something to legalize marijuana, which is really not our area. So have you done any studies on marijuana and hookah and how they relate in health?
I mean, I know that they're, if it's not shisha or tobacco, people do, smoke it with marijuana. I mean, from a lung association standpoint and the negotiations with the federal government and provinces, which are kind of all rolling out now, I mean, with medical marijuana specifically, or even recreational, I'll actually say medical, you can take it in other forms. It doesn't have to be smoked. I mean, from the lung association standpoint, the only things that should be going into your lungs are clean air. And we respect the fact that people may want to smoke medical marijuana for their own use, and that's fine, but you traditionally wouldn't do it through a hookah hookah use, because it becomes more of a social issue. And you know what? If you're going to do it, that's fine. You do it at home, and you do it on your own time. And we certainly don't advocate that But in the end, if someone's going to make a choice to smoke hookah or medical or recreational marijuana, there has to be regulations and limits to what and where they should go.
Right.
And, you know, the home is your castle, and you're more than welcome to do it there. But when you kind of move it into a licensed establishment and parks and playgrounds, you're really affecting everybody around, and that's that limit. I hope I answered your...
No, I appreciate that, and I think that when the federal government does roll this out, as far as doing it in other forms and not smoking, is going to be a challenge because they won't actually know what is in it, and if they're going to sell it legally, and that's a whole other topic. But I think the discussion here is kind of regulating the hookah bars.
Yes.
And when it comes to secondhand smoke and those types of things, I mean, people who go into hookah bars know what they're going into.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that I'm against it, but it's just that, you know, the topic tends to go around the health and safety, which I totally understand. And even for somebody who's an employee, you know, in there, they know they're working at a hookah establishment. So it is a challenge, and you know, for the secondhand smoke, and I understand where Mayor Crombie's coming from there. But my concern is, as we move forward and the federal government does introduce legalization of marijuana, and then we have a lineup of deputants coming and asking us to jump in when it's really not our role or in our jurisdiction. We're talking specifically about a bylaw banning, you know, these types of establishments. So the deputants in speaking and I get it, speaking a lot to health, but for us.
Yeah, and I think that when, you know, the federal government on their own initiative, when they kind of move things, you know, again, my guess is it'll be put back on the provinces to kind of deal with how to regulate, and et cetera. But municipalities and regions such as yourselves really taking the leap have always been so progressive and advanced. And it was because of your good work that the province moved smoke-free legislation. It was cities and regions like Peel and Mississauga that said, you know what, you got to get your act together. In fact, when Toronto banned hookah, one of the councillors made a motion to ask the province, like was suggested today, to deal with hookah province-wide. But you guys have really stepped up and really pushed the province to get their act together, because without it, you know, I'm not saying they would never do it, but they're just slower to act, because you guys are really on the ground. You're on the front lines. It's where, you know, these decisions, you really impact people's lives, and it really shows.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of to my point, that we can't ban the smoking of hookah, or we can't ban marijuana. Establishments we can, but that's kind of where it's going.
Yeah, exactly. And
so, I mean, I think that's what we're talking about, and I just wanted some clarity there, and also, I mean, I think we can all be prepared when marijuana is legalized, that everybody's going to come to us, you know, at that time as well and say, you know, ban it, but that's out of our jurisdiction. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I appreciate you coming and providing that information.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Mayor Crombie.
Right. So just on the marijuana comment, so they couldn't smoke marijuana in a licensed establishment either. So that's the distinction. It's not like you know what you're getting into when you walk in. You can't smoke marijuana in a licensed establishment. You can't smoke anything in a licensed establishment. And if you're smoking hookah now, wouldn't you say if the effects are the same as tobacco on whether it's employees or the individual, then the rules should apply, the same rules as apply to tobacco apply?
Absolutely. There's no.
That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, there's no different.
If it's basically tobacco, the same rules should apply.
I mean, tobacco, shisha, medical, recreational marijuana,
Right.
that's exactly the same
So people
rules.
may have the ability to smoke marijuana in their homes or in their cars or in their backyards, but they still can't smoke it in the street, on a patio, or in a licensed establishment or restaurant.
Absolutely.
So they're not going to be coming forward asking us, what about smoking marijuana?
No, and it shouldn't, and you know, to Mr. Purley's point too, when there's a bit of a kerfuffle back in the day when the minister had made comments on e-cigarettes and medical marijuana, all of a sudden people are saying, oh, you can smoke it in workplaces. But to your point, exactly, it's not your...
Same rules apply.
Same rules apply.
Now, would you also consider this a workplace safety initiative? You know, some of us today participated in the day of mourning when we're there trying to prevent workplace accidents and deaths from occurring. Is this just one more initiative that would help secure the workplace?
You know, absolutely. I mean, along with other, you know, radon and asbestos, this is exactly, it's a workplace hazard, and people over time, I mean, you're not going to get lung cancer, you know, right away, so to speak, but it builds up over time, and these are workplace hazards. And if there isn't some regulation and form of oversight, then unfortunately these day of mournings are going to include more and more people from lung disease. And obviously, today is a prime example of recognizing those people who have perished, and lung health is just as important as falls and so forth. So
Exactly. Chris, you mentioned that you had worked in a bar, restaurant, establishment. Was there at the time, as Councillor Starr was alluding to the fact that at one point we allowed, kind of a ventilated, cubed off, squared off area for people to smoke? Were you there then? Was there
I
still
wasn't. I remember the argument, and I remember the case, some of the establishment. It creates a fairness. I mean, those things, that's not cheap. Mm-hmm. And when you start getting into that, you're still dealing with people inside those chambers and those rooms. I remember bingo halls had it.
That's right.
And, you could do one side, none, but there's still people in there, people hang out there. You're still
Exposed.
You're still exposed.
Right, and the staff have to come in and
And
actually
the staff
serve.
have to come in, and you can imagine it's an 8-hour shift. And you keep doing that, 7 days a week and maybe a day off. And that's a tough, it was always very tough.
Still a workplace hazard.
No matter how you put it, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. DeVilla, did you wish to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There were a couple of points made in the most recent exchange that I think warrant some comment from me. First of all, in respect of the proposed federal legislation on marijuana regulation, I have no doubt that once it becomes clear what the terms are that the federal government wishes to introduce, we will have very interesting and vigorous discussion at this table. But I think at this point in time, without knowing specifically what the federal government and what the specifics are of their proposed legislation, it's early to get into what are the specific impacts for our jurisdiction. Mayor Crombie, to your point on workplace safety, this absolutely is a workplace safety issue. I think, as you've heard through the deputants, there are specific risks associated with water pipe use, not only for the user, but frankly for everyone who's in the vicinity of that user. And you've heard quite a bit about that already today. And finally, I think there was a point made suggesting that patrons of hookah establishments know what they're going into. And actually, I take issue with that, and I take issue with that because we've actually consulted and undertaken a process to understand what users of these facilities actually understand about the risks associated with the use of water pipes. We know that the vast majority of patrons of the establishments in our jurisdiction are actually quite young. They're in the age range of about 18 to 24 years of age. And what's interesting is when you ask them about what they understand of the risks, they nod their heads vigorously and tell you, absolutely, we understand the risks. There really aren't any, or they're minimal compared to the use of tobacco or smoking of cigarettes. So I would argue that, in fact, the majority of the patrons of these facilities are not completely aware of the risks associated with the use of hookah and may not really know what they're walking into when they patronize these establishments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie?
For Dr. DeVilla, though, so if you wanted to move, sure. Mr. Yakato. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation.
So, Dr. DeVilla, there is a sort of a popularity among the youth to participate in this activity. It's perceived as maybe the way cigarette smoking had been initially is very cool. So, and that's why we see 72%, I think, of 18 to 24-year-olds participating in actively smoking hookahs. So are we taking away something from our youth that they perhaps enjoy or is very popular today?
So just to clarify, 72% of patrons, as we consulted with them when we looked and went out and actually sought to interview patrons of these facilities, were 18 to 24 years of age. Not that 72% of 18 to 24-year-olds are actually participating or frequenting these establishments. I think at the end of the day, what you have here is a measure to promote public health. We are actually seeking to provide the best environment for our youth. and to sustain the gains that we've made, as you've heard Michael Perley talk about, over many years in respect of smoking and providing the best environment for health. So yes, I think that there is some prohibition involved here, but it's actually just a question of restricting locations. As you've heard, we're not actually preventing people from using hookah in their homes, for example. It's just a question of preventing its use in public spaces as a measure of promoting workplace health and actually securing public health, because there are specific health risks, not only to the user, but to everyone around them.
Can you tell us how many establishments exist in Peel?
So actually, that's an interesting question, Mayor Crombie, through the chair. Back in 2009, we were aware of 3 such establishments in the region of Peel. By last August, there were an estimated 32, and as of today, there are 24 in the region of Peel.
So they're declining?
They are indeed.
And they are spread across. I noticed, I have a chart because I've been looking into this, that the majority are in Ward 5 in Mississauga.
That's correct.
And there have been obviously closed down. I think there were 2 in Councillor Carlson's ward, and I think those 2 have since closed down since you've done the research.
So there have been some facilities that have outright closed and others that have just eliminated that aspect of their business.
And do we think this will have a serious impact on those businesses?
Well, I think there will be an impact on certain businesses. Certainly those businesses that are offering water pipe use will be impacted. That being said, when we look and having heard what the trajectory is of businesses in our jurisdiction, most of these businesses are fairly new. Some of them, when I look at my list, are a year or a year and a half in existence. As you can see through the report, we're proposing a fairly lengthy period of time to allow the business owners to have the opportunity to find ways to transition into other lines of business. And that we see as a reasonable way to try to mitigate the negative impact on those business owners.
What is that transition period you're providing for?
So we're suggesting an implementation bylaw date of November the 1st.
Okay, I guess this is, and you had done a consultation, and it was Ipsos Reid that made the phone calls, I believe?
That's correct.
Can you let us know how that was conducted and who was reached? And did you make a broader call to different community or cultural groups or other businesses or the restaurant associations? Or
So what we did in the process of the consultation was to consult with the owners of the hookah or water pipe establishments and patrons of those establishments. In respect of trying to speak to business owners, we actually had letters hand-delivered to all the establishments. There were 28 at the time we began the consultation, so we hand-delivered letters to all 28 of those establishments, informing them of the consultation and inviting them to participate and encouraging them to participate when a call was received from the consultant. Those business owners were actually called several times. It wasn't just once. They were actually there were repeated calls made if we were unable or if the consultant was unable to connect with the owner. And we asked the consultant asked a series of questions around the clients of the facilities, what the anticipated impact might be of a prohibition, questions like that, to understand a little bit about their business, how long they'd been in business, that kind of thing. And I believe we were actually able to connect with 20 out of 28 owners at that time.
But the other 8 are aware of what we're considering today.
And actually, in terms of further communication to these business owners, we actually did advise all, now 24, because it's interesting, when we started the consultation, that occurred in January, February of this year, there were 28 businesses. There are now 24, and all 24 business owners currently in operations were informed of today's report and the proposed bylaw.
And do any of the 24 have that ventilated rooms, segregated office Councillor Starr had described? Are you aware of any of them?
I am not. I do have staff here I can ask if we know.
Because the concern is if they've made an investment to create such a facility and now they'll be quite punitive. Are we aware if any of the 24 have made special modifications to accommodate a special area for hookah smoking?
So apparently in consultation, some business owners indicated that they had made such adjustments, but we are not aware of those. And in fact, we have inspectors going out to visit these facilities. So we're not directly aware, but through the consultation process, my understanding is that some of the business owners did indicate that they had made some adjustments.
So they said they did, but we aren't aware of it. We haven't
Correct.
seen, we haven't witnessed
Not
it.
witnessed
We have.
directly by us.
Interesting, okay. And so, I mean, because we knew this was coming, we reached out to some of the cultural groups wondering if they would see this in any way and, you know, kind of an attack on their cultural practices. And you could see overwhelmingly that that wasn't the case, that they all said that hookah was as harmful as cigarette smoking, and so they supported the ban. And I've got, you know, so I think the letters have been distributed to council. There are at least 5 examples here of different organizations that are culturally based and that they're Middle Eastern, and they do support the ban. They do also see hookah smoking as harmful to the health.
Yes, and further to that, as indicated by some of the deputants that have presented here today, there is legislation and some degree of whether it's restrictions or bans in other countries in the world where the practice, in fact, is deemed to have originated.
So you have other questioners on the board. So just my final comment or question to you is, I mean, if the effects are the same as tobacco, should hookah smoking not be treated the way tobacco smoking is treated? And should we not ban it in the same way that we've banned tobacco smoking in licensed establishments?
Well, so in enclosed public spaces, that's precisely what we're proposing
So we should
here.
treat it the way we treat tobacco, because the effects are the same.
Yes, there are harmful effects to the user, to those around the user, which it would include their compatriots and friends, and certainly those who work in establishments like hookah bars or hookah facilities.
Workplace safety as well.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Before we go to our next speaker, I'm going to bring forward 10.1 and ask that staff bring the resolution up on our screens that pertains to 10.1. And I'll go to Councillor Starr.
Yeah, I thank you Doctor, for all the comments. I think you've answered probably most of my questions. Was this done by a consultant?
I'm sorry.
Study?
So we undertook a community consultation as directed by council towards the end of last year. Council directed us to undertake a community consultation in respect of the possibility of introducing a bylaw to regulate hookah and hookah smoking in the region.
Well, maybe
So
maybe I
we did
wasn't clear.
contract.
Did you hire a consultant?
Yes, to undertake that consultation, yes, we did.
And what was the cost of that?
My staff advised me it was $17,000.
Okay. And I'm just going to, by the way, I do support control of what we're trying to do here. My concern is that there's probably a different level during the consultation period of the various facilities, everything from an open restaurant area or bar area all the way down to a very controlled, ventilated part of the building, I guess. I mean, I've been to at least one where it's completely ventilated, totally separate, no children, and anybody under 18 can't get in. And to me, when you see something like that, I don't know if it's their concern of their industry or just the health risks, but I think there is a different level. And I'm just wondering, when you mentioned it's a long period of time, November is not a long period of time. When we went through the banning with bingo halls and billiard halls and all the rest of it, that was years. And I'm not suggesting this should be the same thing, but I would think that those establishments that went out and spent a lot of money, that there should be maybe a second look or maybe a second tier to say, are they out in the open? You're banned November 1st. If you've spent a lot of money and there is something, yes, I mean, they recognize the health risks. And I'm just suggesting that there maybe a second look at that area can be done. I don't want to throw anybody out of business. And because they've done something that there was no direction on from anybody, whether it's municipality or the region or the province. And yes, and I understand from the cultural part of it, but you talk to the average person that I've talked to, and I do have a number in the ward I represent, it is a cultural thing. I mean, it is, it's part of their makeup and from the countries that they came from. And although I don't support the health risks, I would think that there should be something looked at, and it doesn't address it in the report, but something to say, okay, if it depending on what level you have in your shop, let's call it that, or store, or that maybe there's a different transition period so that some of that can be recovered monetarily. I don't want to have somebody coming back here in our October meeting saying they're going bankrupt because of that. We didn't give them enough time. We did that with the billiard halls. I'm not sure how long that was because I think it was about 3 years, maybe longer.
I don't know what it was.
You know?
Through the chair, I can speak to that because that was my portfolio. The initial plan was something like 3 years, but then the province came in and passed provincial legislation and said no designated smoking areas, so it ended up being much shorter.
So how long, a couple of years?
I think within a year of us passing our bylaw, the province passed provincial legislation. It was about that time, and so they were eliminated just with their legislation.
As an anecdotal issue on this, I used to help out with a charity, and when it was all open, and that was terrible. And I used to go home at 11 o'clock at night and change my clothes in the garage. And then I fought to work the closed room, and so I mean I understand a little bit about the health risks part of it. And then of course all these same people, then they all went outside. So I don't know. I don't know if you can address that the level of concern that the operators have for their patrons, and if they spend some money, is there any thought to giving them a little bit longer?
So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Starr. A couple of things. When we actually conducted our consultation with business owners and with the patrons of these facilities, what was interesting was that the business owners actually talked about specifically targeting an older population and gave the sense that their clientele was in fact 30 to 60 years of age on average. But when we actually went out and sought out the opportunity to speak with patrons of the facilities, the vast majority, over 70%, were actually in a much younger demographic, 18 to 24 years of age. So, there are things that you hear from particular individuals, and then there's that which happens, which is why we went out to actually go out and confirm for ourselves what the particular circumstances were. I think in respect of some of the users in the facilities, I can also tell you that through our inspection process and our as we have inspectors out in the field, I can share with you anecdotes where some of the clientele that are being provided water pipes in some of these establishments are quite young. In one circumstance, as young as 9 years old. And, I think that it's shocking, particularly given what we know of the health risks associated with water pipe use. I think the final point that bears mentioning now at this stage is that many of the businesses, as I indicated in an earlier comment, actually quite a few of them, and we can go through one by one if that's desired, are quite new. Some of the facilities, when I look at the list, have been in business for about a year or 18 months. And so to have a period, I think, of 6 months is almost as long as the entire operational life of the facility. So while I do agree and recognize that there will be some negative impacts on businesses, we are doing our very best to, and we've tried to do our best to ensure that they're informed of what's happening so that they can make the necessary plans to adjust. And I think at the end of the day, what we are doing is making a move towards public health, protecting the workers of the facilities and the users and those around them.
I agree with you there. Just a final question. Of the 20 units that were surveyed by your consultant, and you say they all, or 70% fell into the 18 to 24, how many, what's that actual number that you interviewed?
I will have to check with you, check on my... So the actual number was 105.
100?
And 5. Patrons.
Or 20 units?
Yes.
I'm not much of a statistician, but that's not a very large population you've... I mean, the reason I brought that up is that the two establishments I visited were all older people, older. And I'm not going to say what age, because a number of us fall into that category. Anyway, I just want to bring that point up.
I appreciate that. And remember, some of the facilities are both restaurants and have some degree of water pipe or hookah available. So you'll keep in mind that they're not exclusively or necessarily exclusive water pipe facilities. So some of the businesses do have the option to continue on with their food service business, of course.
No, I understand that, and I'm certainly going to vote for it. But I just think that, to me, my reaction, the survey is skewed. 105 in 20 establishments, that's nothing.
Well, I think, what I can tell you is good methodologically about the survey is that they went at various points in the day and went at points when people actually do frequent the facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yannicka.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, this has been very enlightening, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I want to commend the Mayor, Mayor Crombie, for being at the vanguard of this, because I didn't realize it was as serious as it is, and it's given me a little bit more awareness to try and understand. And so I would say to you, not for response, but anecdotally, when I look at, maybe my first point is a shout out to our health departments and how well we've done locally and in Canada. In my travels over the last decade, when I go to Europe, for example, I'm convinced the young people there think smoking is a cure for cancer. I have no idea what's gone on there, but when you are in Western Europe, virtually anywhere I go, the young folk smoke. I'm blessed that I've got two teenage sons, a lot of friends always over at my place. I've never seen one of them smoke, and I've never seen them sneak off to smoke. Which brings me to my next point. I've been entertained a lot by people. I've entertained a lot of people when you go to lunch or dinner. I've never smoked anything in my life. That's just the way I grew up. You meet with a smoker, not unusual that as I'm coming in, they have to have that last drag before they go into the restaurant because they're not allowed to smoke. Some in the middle of the meal will beg off to go have a drag. I get it. And then on their way out, I'm sure they're having a smoke in the car. True story. It was about a year and a half ago. My wife and I were in a U.S. jurisdiction, and we went into Luigi's Italian Trattoria and Hookah Bar. Got my hand to God. And so we go in, and it was a more upscale place than I thought it would have been. And sort of on that side were all the young and beautiful people, and they're always young. And of course, my wife might have fit in, but I'm on this side having a meal. And here's the specific point that I want to raise purely anecdotally, and I've since observed it, and tell me if my observation's correct. When people are smoking from this pipe, they're sitting down, and it's the young, and that pipe never leaves their hand. They're holding it, and then they'll have a sip of their drink. They're holding it, they're chatting. They'll have a little piece of a nibble that's on the table, and they will hold it for the entire time that they're there, and take a drag, and take a drag, and take a drag. Never sit it on the table. They'll never, in my observations. Then that fella comes along, and he restokes them, so you can see the embers going back in. So my point is that over the course of their sit, for the time that they are there, they are ubiquitously sucking on the end of that thing. And so I've always wondered, I get the cigarette before, I get the one you might sneak away, but they are the equivalent of the chain smoker where they never let go of that thing. And I've since had reason to look, and it's the nature of the beast. And so I've wondered, what volume of noxious gases are you taking in at one sitting relative to a cigarette? Discussion for another day, but if it's got any harm whatsoever, I think the intensity of the usage over an hour or two sitting, because that's all I seem to observe, that cannot be a good thing. So just like the smoking debate and the great work that we've done, I see this in the same vein, and we've got to prevent our young kids from getting addicted to it because I see no good coming from it. So I commend you, Mayor Crombie, and I think we're on the right path, and I support it fully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parrish.
Well, I hope you never get this one through and then you ban the wine bars because I'm going to be in real trouble. And then you're going to go after the oyster bars and we're in real trouble. And nobody seems to care about the fluoride in the water. But anyway, I have some concerns along the same line as Councillor Starr. In all these Dear Ashley letters, I assume that's your Ashley, they all talk about enclosed public spaces. Now, as an old sociology person, I agree with with Ron Starr that it's the way you ask the questions. If you ask all these people if you want to ban hookah pipes in public spaces or public enclosed spaces, they think plazas, they think doctor's offices, they think all those places where the public comes and goes all the time. They don't think a private club. They don't think, as Councillor Mahoney pointed out, a restaurant where you're specifically going because you know that's what's there. Now, I'm not defending the 8 in my area, but I am looking at one of the Dear Ashley letters where it says, Shisha smoking in the Arab community is an addiction and a cultural practice which has been going on for many generations. We just can't ban it out all of a sudden cold turkey. It would be a harsh decision. People rely on these establishments for social gatherings, establishments who have invested lots of their life savings and would hurt these business owners financially. Alternatively, I would suggest leaving these existing establishments alone for the time being and gradually phasing them out, while putting a ban or restriction on any new future licenses. So I'm going to vote to ban these. Of course I am. But I think the established 20 should be grandfathered. There should be time limits. They close the same time as the bar does, and age limits on who can go in them. When we banned tanning beds, another evil, all we did was say 18-year-olds and under couldn't go in there. We didn't say adults who want to kill themselves with skin cancer can't go in there. And we don't tell anybody they can't go into a bar and drink themselves silly and call an Uber cab and go home. So I really think this is very harsh, and I think it's very harsh against a particular community. I've traveled all through the Middle East, and this is a very common practice. And even when you say Syria has banned it, well, first of all, they're blowing each other up, so it's not going to matter what they smoke. But Syria only bans it in certain areas, and they restrict it. So I would like to see an amendment to whatever motion comes forward that we at least grandfather these locations. We limit the time that and the age group that can go into them. And let's be reasonable here. Give them 2 years. Give them 24 months. And don't touch my wine bars or my oyster bars, or for sure I'm going to get really angry.
Councillor Sato.
Thank you. I don't know how I can follow that one up, but, you know, the comments that Councillor Starr and Councillor Parrish have made, it's kind of like deja vu, because that's exactly what we heard when we banned cigarette smoking in restaurants and bars. And, you know, we went through the process of allowing them to build those silly little rooms that every time they opened the door, the whole restaurant filled up with smoke. And some of the restaurants did go to a lot of expense doing it, and they knew they had a certain period of time. They went for it anyway. All we heard when we started the consultation, and Jeanette will remember, I was on the committee, and so I got to get a lot of abuse from restaurant owners and bar owners that we were going to put them out of business, we were going to kill their business. Not one restaurant or bar closed down because they banned smoking. And as a matter of fact, I heard from the same restaurants afterwards who said that their business increased because families started coming to eat in their establishments instead of the lone person who came in and sat at the bar for 3 hours and ordered 1 beer. And no food to go with it. So yes, there are concerns over business. We had the concerns at that time as well. We certainly are not in the business in the habit of trying to put people out of business, but we are responsible for public health, and we have to remember that. We're responsible for the health of the youth in our community. And we're even responsible for the health of those older people who I heard a lot from. I had one gentleman who was doing a Cable 10 show at Natty's, and smoke-filled restaurant and bar, and of course I wasn't the most popular person there. Was in there doing it with another restaurant owner from Brampton. And this gentleman came over to me, and he had a cigarette in his hand, and he said, you know, I don't like that you're trying to ban cigarette smoking in these bars. And then he pulled up his shirt, and he showed me his scar from his heart surgery, that he had had a bad heart caused by cigarette smoking. And I said, well, you should be the one sitting down here supporting it. And he goes, nah, he said, I've got my oxygen tank that I have to use. And he said, I've really got nothing left except my cigarettes and my booze. And that was it. He just wanted to be able to sit in the bar and drink and smoke. And I said, well, that's really nice. You can drink and smoke yourself to death. You're causing the health system a lot of money, costing the health system a lot of money. But why would you feel that you can impose that on everyone else that comes in and that is around you? So, you know, we heard all those arguments. We went through it all. And this council had the strength in that time, and I can't remember what year it was now, but it was a long time ago. This council had the strength at that time to look at our responsibility of protecting public health, protecting those who were smoking, and those who were not smoking, in particular, from the secondhand smoke. This is a very toxic, we heard this today, it is as toxic, if not more toxic, than cigarette smoking. And we have to take action. I think our medical officer of health has made it very clear. They have done the research, they've done the studies, and this is the action that our council has to take. Councillor Parrish, if an establishment wants to come forward and ask for an exemption after this has passed, they can certainly do that, and we can certainly listen to them. Whether we grant it or not is another thing. But I think today we need to pass the bylaw as it stands today and deal with those issues afterwards. And we did not give an extremely long period of time from the day we passed the bylaw to the day it was enacted. And, you know, you've got to take action, and we're known for doing that. And I hope the province will just very quickly take this over, deal with it, and make it provincial coverage. And then they will be showing leadership and responsibility. But we need to show that leadership today.
Before I go to Mayor Crombie again, Mayor Crombie had suggested that she wished to move this when it came forward. Councillor Sato would second it. Okay, just so for clarification. Mayor Crombie.
Thank you, Councillor Sato. And to Councillor Parrish as well, I too don't support the exemption for the 24 establishments because it creates a two-tier system. Some can and some can't, and it also creates a double standard. They are aware. They are aware what our plans and our motives are. They've been informed. They've been consulted. They know it's coming. They have an opportunity to make those changes starting the fall. So I think they've got ample time to accommodate the change. We've consulted with all of them, and also the cultural communities. And if you note, Harry Mawani, whose letter you read from, also said, in my personal opinion about smoking of any kind of tobacco in any shape or form is very clear. I do not agree with any form of smoking, be it shisha, pipes, cigarettes, or cigars. And so if the effects of hookahs are the same effects of tobacco, then the same rules as tobacco should apply. And that's the bottom line. If it's tobacco, if it smells like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It's tobacco. The same rules should apply as apply with tobacco. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Well, can we turn to the bylaw for a minute? I just want some clarification on how we're going to enforce this. Under the definitions, it says, page 15-1. Just clarification, folks. Put away the guns. Under enclosed public space means the inside of any place, building, or structure, or vehicle, or conveyance, or any part of any of them. And that's quite a bit beyond even regular cigarette smoking, by the way. People can smoke in their cars if they want to. A, that is covered by a roof, and B, that employees work in or frequent during the course of their employment, whether or not they are acting in the course of their employment. Does that mean if there were a private club and the owner of the club has no employees, he can have shisha in his club? Who's going to define it for me, please? Who's the hair splitter? Patrick, always, my favorite.
That would simply mean that they aren't in an enclosed public space. It appears to me that there are other areas that are covered by the bylaw. In a private club, I'm not sure whether that would fall into one of the other areas or not. Just quickly scanning it, it might not be the case, but if it's a restaurant or bar patio, presumably then there would be employees, so your scenario doesn't play out.
Well, no, Ron's got one in Ward 6. It was probably the first one ever that came into the GTA. And it's a private club. You have to have a membership card to get in. There's nobody under the age of 18. And there's usually only one guy in there, and he runs it and he owns it. He doesn't pay himself. He just works there. He owns the place. So technically, he's okay.
On a quick, on-the-fly basis, I don't see that that's covered by the prohibition in Section 2 of the bylaw.
Okay, so then you're answering me with two negatives. He could continue to run his club as long as he has no employees, and it's a club, and you have to be a member to be there.
Yeah, because he's not covered by the prohibition.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Crombie.
Just so if I had a private club and I wanted to offer my patrons smoking, I could do that too? No employees? They could come in and join my club and smoke? It's a smoking club.
I should confer here, if you'd like, an on-the-fly interpretation with the draftsperson of the bylaw, so if you'll pardon me for a moment.
My feeling is that whatever rules apply to tobacco should apply to hookah.
Understood.
So
Dr. DeVilla?
Of course, through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Parrish, as I understand it, this is a very similar definition to that which we see in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. So I believe, in fact, that as Mayor Crombie has suggested, it would be quite similar to that which we see for tobacco. These are the exact same definitions as articulated in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. But I defer to my legal experts here when it comes to legal interpretation. I admit you're getting a physician's interpretation of the law.
Patrick, would you concur with that?
I'm going to have to take the fifth here, Mr. Chairman.
Wrong country. Now you sound like us.
Exactly right. I mean, I'm happy to entertain any of these questions and give you something more definitive, but interpreting the bylaw on the fly is something that I find difficult because I'm not the primary provider of this particular product.
Fair enough. Councillor Parrish?
If I might speak, I have to interpret it on the fly too, Patrick, and I'm not as smart as you. So I'm going to have to make a decision today on something that I don't agree with. I don't think we can do this. And I would like to ban it in public places and do everything that everybody else wants to do. But I think we need to stop short of banning a social practice in a building that would be run by one person, would be a club or whatever. There has to be a loophole in this thing. And then phase it out.
It doesn't use private clubs.
And Councillor Sato always able to interpret things for me better than I can. It says enclosed public space means the inside of any place, building or structure or vehicle. So you're saying it has to be a bus or a cab. So if it's your own car, you can sit there with a hookah pipe and drive along.
Well, police will get you for that.
I don't know who drafted this. There's too many questions here.
It's in the Ontario Act.
Well, Ontario's not the smartest people we know. Somebody just tell me how to vote.
Vote yes.
Patrick, how would you vote if you were voting?
Oh.
Never mind the 5th.
That's not a question that I should answer.
You are smart.
Oh,
If there's
that'll
no
be clear.
employees, it's not covered.
I think you're right.
Well, that's what it says.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
If you can add something, please do.
I shall do my very best to add something to the discussion. Just in respect of a proposal made by Councillor Parrish, I think that we've had, and I think Councillor Sato spoke to this before, when it comes to trying to distinguish, what's a private place with or without employees, as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that enclosed public space would include that private bar. Or private club, as Councillor Parrish is describing, but I will defer to my legal counsel colleagues in respective interpretation. I would like to point out to Council, however, that having these distinctions between what's a private club and what's not, and whether there are employees or not, is in fact a rather difficult or presents a challenge in respect of enforcement, which is why I believe the bylaw has been proposed the way it has. So that private club would be included in the bylaw. It is covered by the bylaw as it is written, in my opinion, and that was certainly the intent. Right? As Mayor Crombie suggested, we're looking to treat this. We recognize that this is a hazardous substance. It's a hazardous practice similar to that for smoking. Hence, the terms that we've employed are similar to that which are seen in the Smoke Free Ontario Act.
I got a question. I got people on the list here. Councillor Parrish, did you have any? Okay, thank you. Councillor Toby.
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly. So it says prohibiting water pipe smoking in specified public areas, and then it also says request to include the prohibition of the public use of hookah, shisha, water pipe smoking. People can smoke cigarettes in public, so how would this be enforceable? Because you can smoke cigarettes in public, and we're saying you won't be able to smoke this in public. So I guess, when this whole debate about whether or not we should treat it exactly like cigarettes, how would we defend a challenge on that? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not reading the bylaw as prohibiting all public places. It has a number of provisions. I mean, we could walk through them if that would be helpful. But we started with a scenario that Councillor Parrish proposed. She proposed, as I understood it, a private club that has no employees in it, and referred to the enclosed public place definition. The enclosed public place definition has a two-pronged content, one of which is covered by a roof, the second of which is that employees work in. Under that presupposition that there are no employees, it would not be an enclosed public place. If we move over to the prohibition section, Section 2, Section 2 covers a number of circumstances, only one of which is an enclosed public space. So the proper interpretation of the bylaw would call for your theoretical club without the employees to fall under one of the other headings of prohibition. Now, it might conceivably be a restaurant without employees. I don't know. It becomes very fact-driven. I don't see it as falling under any of the other areas here. Hence my answer to you that I didn't think without employees that it would in fact be covered by the bylaw.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. If you wouldn't mind, could you answer my question too?
I'm sorry, Counselor.
Yeah, the question
Always
was...
always thinking of the previous question.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your response. It just says that include the prohibition of the public use of hookah, and then the other part is prohibiting water pipe smoking in specified public areas. So we're actually being more onerous on this than we are on tobacco use. That's what it sounds like to me, because people that smoke cigarettes can smoke in public. So I'm just wondering how this motion that we have in front of us would actually succeed if it was challenged in court. That's all. I mean, I'm going to vote for it, but I just wondered what our chances of success would be given the way it's written.
And I'm sorry, bear with me, but could you point me to this precise wording that you're referring to there?
In the motion before us here.
Oh, the motion.
Yeah, we have prohibiting water pipe smoking in specified public areas. And then further that the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care requested to include the prohibition of the public use of hookah, shisha, water pipe smoking in provincial smoke-free Ontario legislation, but that people can smoke cigarettes in public. So what we're doing is making it more onerous on these people. And my question would be, if we were to make it more onerous than actual tobacco use, then how would that succeed if anyone challenged us on the bylaw in court?
And I think the answer there is it may be that the province would be hesitant to include in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act a more sweeping prohibition than is applicable to tobacco.
Right.
And so that aspect of things might not come to pass. If it did, in fact, go that far, you would have legislation which would back up the prohibition, but it would be provincial legislation, as that's what's being requested in that provision.
And what about the first piece, ours? Prohibit water pipe smoking in specified public areas.
In that instance, it's actually the bylaw that's going to govern. It's not this resolution. The resolution is basically calling for this bylaw to be brought forward for enactment. It's going to govern in accordance to its terms, with its terms, one of which I've sort of run through under Councillor Parrish's scenario. So I don't think the bylaw is not going to be perhaps as broad when it's actually read in accordance with its terms as this particular first recital to the, or first element of the resolution would call for.
Right. So I guess my supplementary and final question would be then, if we were to pass this, are you content that the bylaw would be enforceable given this motion? Or would you feel that maybe we should do a little more work on the bylaw and bring it back next month?
No.
Just a question.
Let me read the first clause that's causing you concern.
Actually, Patrick, if I could just jump in here. When you go down to the First Amendment, per se, that's what's in red, if the first line was consistent with that line, would that not keep it the same, incorporate it as the same?
No, well, I was just asking Patrick what his opinion. I'm fine. I'm going to vote for it. I think it's a great idea, but I'm just a little curious as to whether or not it's actually going to be defensible in court if anybody challenges us on it. That's all.
At the end of the day, if this council chooses to enact this bylaw, then the court won't be asked to look back to the resolution that brought it forward for enactment. They will look at the bylaw and interpret the bylaw.
And you're content that the bylaw is defensible?
The bylaw is defensible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Grove. No, sorry, Councillor Starr. My apologies.
I'm calling the question. I have knitting lessons tonight at 7:30.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of calling the vote? Carried. It's been moved by Mayor Crombie, seconded by Councillor Sato. I'll take it taken as read, and it's a request has been made for a recorded vote. So, Madam Clerk.
All those in favor, please rise. Councillor Carlson, Mayor Crombie, Councillor Downey, Councillor Fonseca, Councillor Groves, Councillor Ianika, Councillor Innes, Mayor Jeffrey, Councillor Kovac, Councillor Mahoney, Councillor McFadden, Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Miles, Councillor Raz, Councillor Sato. Oh, my apologies, Councillor Moore, sorry. Councillor Sato, Councillor Shaughnessy, Councillor Sprovieri, Councillor Starr, Mayor Thompson, Councillor Tovey. Opposed, please rise. Councillor Paleshi and Councillor Parrish. It carries. Thank you.
That's Patrick's fault for pleading the fifth, you know. Okay, the motion's carried. If the mover being Mayor Crombie and the seconder being Councillor Sato, if you would move items of communication that relate to this, items 11.1, 11.6. All in favor then of those? Carried. I'm going to move forward items related to health because there's one other item and might as well deal with everything that's included in health. And I'll go to Councillor Moore to chair that section, please.
Well, thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. It doesn't matter. There's just one report. I do want to appreciate that you've brought this forward so we can deal with health altogether. It's the supply and installation of power cot and loading solution for Peel Regional Paramedic Services and the associated budget moved by Councillor Groves.
I'm on the
I
board.
see you. I see. Councillor Parrish.
I wanted to move it.
Well,
It's been a long time coming. I want to thank
in the
staff.
interest of cooperation, Councillor Parrish moves, Councillor Groves seconds. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you.
Items related to enterprise programs and services then. Councillor Fonseca, if you'd chair this section, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 7.1 is the 2016 update on Region of Peel's financial condition and management actions related to Peel's financial strategy. For information, Councillor Tovey.
Great, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions when I was looking at this on 7.12. A 1% infrastructure levy on the 2016 budget, get that. 3.5% in infrastructure levy increase for the next 4 years, 2016 to 2019. So is that on the water and the wastewater, or is that additional on the tax levy? Tax levy.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's additional on the water levy,
On
and
the
that's been
water
in place
levy.
for the past 2 budget cycles as well.
Right, exactly. Isn't that kind of, it's lower than we did last year?
It's the same as the past 2 budgets.
Is it? Okay, great. Then I'm fine. Thank you.
I apologize.
Okay. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak, but I just wanted to say when I was reading this report, it is so nice to read a regional report that looks at the financial sustainability of the region of Peel, that tells us exactly what we need, exactly where we're going, that they know what is coming down the pipe in future years, and they're letting council know so that we can be ensured that we plan ahead. So really good report, and thank you very much. And I'd be happy to move it.
Okay, Councillor Tovey, you're back on the board.
Yes, thank you. Yes, sorry, I did have one more question. On 7.14, says our current gap stands at 1.1 billion, which is a reduction from the gap of 1.35 billion reported in the 2015 update. So I assume that that gap would be on top of the 1.4 billion that we borrowed for to upfront infrastructure.
Through you, Madam Chair, the gap is, this is our state of good repair gap. So
Right.
this is our long-term 20-year capital financing requirements.
Got
So
it.
this is funding that will make up through the 3.5%. If we didn't have the 3.5% in place, we would then probably have to look at other means of financing.
Right, but that current gap that's not including the 1.4 billion that we borrowed
No, it
for
does not.
infrastructure.
But
So that's it.
it's a future-oriented number.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, and I too wanted to thank you. I think the breakdown of the financial condition scorecard and the way the report is laid out is easy to understand. Just for a clarification on the utility, the adequate capital reserves utility side. So the increase is, or the recommendation is for a 3.5% increase for 2017, 2018, and 2019, correct?
That is correct.
Correct. And okay, thank you. And one other question with regards to a decline on the non-residential tax revenue. So 37.6%. there's been a decline over the last 10 years from 42 to 37%, which you're recognizing as a gap. And there's reference to an update in terms of the strategy. When will that update be expected to council?
So we're really working through the Growth Management Committee, looking at how we mitigate the risk of closing the cost revenue gap for development charge revenue. And one of the things that we're working through the Growth Management Committee has been over the past decade, we haven't been achieving the same level of employment related infrastructure developments in Peel. So we're looking at how do we mitigate the risk from a regional perspective, working in partnership with the area municipalities in terms of what is that changing nature of employment and how can that inform their economic development plans.
Okay, thank you very much. So moved by Councillor Miles, seconded by Councillor Downey. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.2, Councillor Parrish asked to move that into camera. Should we do that now? Or?
We'll hold that, and then I believe we'll go into camera at the appropriate time and then come back and deal with that.
Okay. 7.3 is the Region of Peel role update and delivery of 211 services. Councillor Miles.
Madam Chairman, I wanted to recognize and thank the staff both at the Region of Peel and the area municipalities for the work that was done on this particular report. This was a report that came out of our budget process to ensure that the residents of the Region of Peel were getting the best value for the dollars that were being spent on the call center. And I think that even though it was a lot of work, at the end of the day, it was a really positive learning process for all of the parties who were at the table, and that there's a lot of recommendations and outcomes from this particular report that is going to help all municipalities in the Region of Peel to ensure the absolute best customer service for our residents. So I wanted to say that and recognize the work that the committee has done in this particular regard. And again, I would be happy to move the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. So moved by Councillor Miles, seconded by Councillor Mahoney. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Item 7.4, this is for information. It's an update on the 311 Joint Multi-Channel Review. Seeing no questions, moved by Councillor Grove, seconded by Mayor Thompson. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.5 is a Region of Peel. This is a presentation. This is on the External Client Satisfaction Survey. Oh, yes. Councillor Miles.
I'm sorry. I spoke in error. My comments about the good job
for 311
was for regards to 311. I wondered why everybody was looking at me like I was stupid. So I guess I am. Anyway, so those comments were in regards to 311. But in regards to the 211 service, I wanted to ask a question. I'm sorry, and I apologize. So am I to believe that 211, which is a program that provides direct information to provincial programs, is totally funded by the Region of Peel?
Community Services. Gilbert, if you can.
Yeah, through you, Madam
please?
Chair. No, it is not totally funded. There's contributions. It's number one, I believe it's a federal program, not just a provincial program.
100% It's only available in
Only available. Yeah. So it's available in 60% of Canada? Yeah. It's available in 60% of Canada, and there's contributors to the program. And it allows information and referrals to be disseminated for the residents to different community partners that we have. And the Region of Peel is a participant in that program, and so are other municipalities through either direct service delivery or indirect service delivery.
Okay. Sorry, Gilbert. The report is recommending that we're actually going to hand 211 over to an outside agency, correct? And the estimated cost to the Region of Peel is from $156,000 to $260,000?
That is correct, because to date, there is no agreed-upon rate that municipalities are attributed. Those are ongoing discussions that have been, how long? 2 years? They've been ongoing for 5 years.
Discussions with whom?
With the province. Urban Commissioners Group.
Maybe, could you have your staff come down?
Sure.
Yes, that would,
Thank you.
and Councillor Miles, if you, I'm not sure if you've looked through the chart that's within the report.
I
that
did.
shows 7.3-7.
I did.
It shows an overview of the funding contributions to the 211 system.
So thank you. What I understood from this was that there was different levels of funding for different communities. There was different funding models in different communities, and that we were going to hand it over, and it's basically a provincial, it should be a provincial responsibility, but we haven't been successful in getting provincial funding, so it's being funded by the city, by the Region of Peel, United Way, and someone else, right?
So if I can just speak at a global level to how
Please.
Ontario 211 is funded, and we are the governance organization for 211 strictly in Ontario. We receive funding.
Who are you?
Sorry, I'm the executive director for Ontario 211 Services.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
We receive $4 million annually from the province for delivery of 211. We receive municipal dollars in the neighborhood of $1 million across the province in various communities. And we receive just over $1 million in United Way funding as well.
Okay. So out of that, the region's contribution is somewhere between 150 and 200,000.
Correct. According to the overall funding model, which proposed that provincial government, municipal government, federal government, and United Ways or other would make up that funding envelope.
The total. Does the federal government contribute?
Pockets? Maybe I'll let Sue answer
Yes,
that.
sorry, I'm Sue Wilkinson. I'm the Executive Director for Find Help Information Services in Toronto.
Okay.
And currently, we are the only 211 national service partner that actually gets federal dollars. So we have a little over 700,000 we get annually from the, its new name, Immigrant, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, formerly Citizenship and Immigration Canada.
So when you say we,
Yes.
and you're in Toronto, does that mean Toronto's getting it, but the Region of Peel is not?
Find Help gets those resources to serve the City of Toronto, York, and Durham. And should this be passed, we will be going back to CIC, formerly named CIC, to incorporate Peel as well. So there may be a possibility there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I really do appreciate it. I read the report and I really was unsure about where we stood as a region, and I thought we were being shortchanged, which I guess we are, but hopefully we won't once we pass this resolution. So I appreciate that clarification. Okay, thank you.
And thank you very much. Thank you.
So
for the
I'm happy
questions.
to move then.
Okay, and I think the chart that shows transformation and alignment of the 211 helps explain how we got to the report being here today for the region to pass. It talks about establish, expand, transform, and align with regards to 211 and where the funding is coming from and how that will be more of a fair delivery, not of the service, but of where the funding comes from, which will now include the Region of Peel. I think that's my interpretation of the report. So thank you very much for the further explanation. So are you okay to still move? Yeah. It's already been moved?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now we're back to 7.5, and there is a presentation from Matthew Jackson, and forgive me if I'm saying this incorrectly, but Sheen Nakado? Yes. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of council. My name is China Nkado, and I'm the Manager of Business Intelligence. We're here to share with you some insights from the external client satisfaction research that we completed last year. 2015 marks the 5th wave of comprehensive client satisfaction survey, and previous waves were conducted in 2008, 9, 11, and 2013. The external client satisfaction measurement strategy was put in place to ensure that the voice of our customers are brought into the region to inform planning efforts within the region, and also to ensure that we have a rigorous and consistent approach to measuring input from our clients and feedback from them. User experience will continue to be a key metric that we use to assess how well we are doing as an organization moving forward. I would like to introduce Matthew Jackson, who is representing Malatest, to present results of the survey and the key insights that we learned from it.
Thank you very much. Just advance the slides here. So I'm here, you have a report before you, I think, that presents some of the high-level. Thank you. You have a report before you that presents some of the high-level findings that we determined from the enterprise-wide client satisfaction survey. I'm just going to hit some of the even higher-level notes from that report, and be happy to answer any of the questions that you have regarding the information in front of you. So we interviewed 2 separate streams. We interviewed residents as well as businesses regarding their satisfaction with services that they receive from the region of Peel. I'm going to discuss the resident satisfaction results first. The slide that you see in front of you here represents a model that we built based on the feedback from residents of 17 different services offered by the region of Peel. And what we want to do with models like this are determine what are the key drivers of satisfaction, or what makes residents, what components of service makes residents most satisfied with the services that they receive. One of the interesting things that we noticed this wave that differed from last wave is that the channel that residents used to access services was the most important driver of satisfaction with regional service this wave. Previously, we'd seen staff as the key driver of satisfaction. That's moved down to the 3rd ranking here. And the strength of the relationship you'll see is measured by the impact of beta, and that's a statistical term, but it basically says if we increase satisfaction with the channel by 1 point, how much can we expect overall resident satisfaction to change? And the larger that beta value, the more it drives satisfaction with service overall. So the access channel experience, this refers to the way that the service was accessed by the resident. This can be over the phone with a live agent. It can be over an online channel, website or email. It could be in-person service delivery at a counter or an office location. And we saw that this is the most important driver of satisfaction, their experience with the channel that they access the service. And the good news here is that it's also an area that's performing well. So it's not only important, but it's not only important, but it's also an area in which residents are very satisfied. And I'll speak a little bit more to the details of that in the slides to come. The next most important driver of overall satisfaction was the service outcome, so whether or not the resident got what they needed from the service or didn't. And the 3rd most important driver was their interaction with staff. Not all services that are accessed involve staff interaction, but for the ones that did, this was the 3rd most important driver of satisfaction. I mentioned earlier that it was the most important driver of satisfaction in 2013, and we've seen that dip down a little. And it's still all 3 of the most important areas of satisfaction with regional services, though, are areas that are performing well, which is great news. So as I mentioned, the channel through which residents access services is the most important driver of overall satisfaction. We can see, if we break it down by different channel and we look at within channels as a whole, which one is most impactful. Telephone with live agent, followed by in-person or at an office or service counter, and followed by website. That's kind of the order of ranking of most important channel by which services are accessed. Excuse me. And you'll see that they're in different colors. And this is, we're looking at a relationship within the channels, which one are most impactful versus least impactful and how they're performing. So ones in red, you can see the scores are not necessarily low, but they're low relative to other channels. So telephone with a live agent, while the score is still relatively high, if you're considering it on an absolute scale, compared to services that are accessed in person, is slightly lower, and similar with website. Email, it's denoted in yellow here. It means it's less impactful on overall satisfaction than the other channels, but it's still important, not something that you'd want to neglect. And it's also an area that has improved significantly relative to previous waves of the study. By significantly, you can see the scores increased from 6.0 out of 10 to 7.9 out of 10, which in statistical terms is a significant increase, but it passes the eye test as quite a jump as well. And not only has satisfaction with service access through email improved, but the use of email has increased quite dramatically. When we look at the number of people that are accessing services via email compared to the previous wave of the study, which was in 2013, we see a 254% increase in the number of people that are using email to access service. This is a pretty dramatic jump. Other channels maybe have increased or decreased by 4 or 5%. So this, in the context of the other channels used, is the uptake has been dramatic over the last 2 years. And like email, more and more residents are using the website to access services as well. The use of the website has increased significantly. When we surveyed residents in 2013, I have the number right here in front of me. 18% in 2013 had visited the Region of Peel website in the last year. When we asked them this year, or this past year in 2015, 32% of people said that they visited the website. And when we asked them what they visited for, the result probably won't surprise you. It's about garbage and recycling, given the transition to the cart-based system that I'm sure you're all very, very well aware of. And not only are they visiting the website for information, but they're also using the website to transact with the government, to pay service charges or bills. And what we've seen is when we ask residents whether or not they'd be inclined to use the website in the next year to access services or transact with the government, 35% of residents said that they would, versus 25% of residents in 2013. So you can see that the uptake of these online channels has been quite dramatic and has been a kind of an area that residents are much more comfortable transacting with the government. When we ask them why they're not using the website, for the most part, it's just because they don't see the need to use online services, or they don't have access to the internet, which marked about 11% of your residents. When we look at these services, the channels that they're using as a whole, one area stands out as an area for priority improvement, and that's receiving consistent information between sources. But things that are going very well, the residents find these channels easy to use, and they also, in cases where they're interacting with staff, they appreciate staff taking the time to explain things to them. These are areas for proactive maintenance, things that you're doing well that you want to keep doing well. I mentioned outcome of the service was the second most important driver of satisfaction. That's another area where the region's excelling in terms of client satisfaction. This wave we saw in 2015, we saw 89% of those who were reporting a positive outcome of the service or getting what they needed. 89% of residents said they got what they needed from a service versus 82% of residents from a comparable sample in the previous wave of the survey. So more residents, significantly more residents have gotten what they needed in this wave of the survey. But we see this has a dramatic impact on whether or not residents got what they needed, has a dramatic impact on their overall satisfaction. For those that said they got what they needed, they gave an overall satisfaction rating of 8.7, again, out of 10. And those that said they didn't get everything that they needed, and this isn't only people that are saying they got none of what they needed, but also people that said they got part of what they needed, they're reporting an overall satisfaction rate that's 44% lower at 4.9 out of 10. It's not always possible to give a resident what they need. There's sometimes where requests are unreasonable or just not within the scope of the service that's being offered. And this is an area where the recommendations that we've passed on to the various departments is setting reasonable expectations for clients as they begin a service interaction to mitigate this negative perception of the service they've received. And finally, the third most influential driver of satisfaction was staff. As I mentioned, this was the most influential driver, but it's also something that's been a positive part of the client's experience over the last several waves of the survey. And while it's less influential now, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it also can indicate sometimes when this happens in similar types of studies that residents begin taking for granted the good service that they get from the staff that they interact with. It becomes more of an expectation that this norm will be maintained, and becomes less important because they're used to receiving high-level service from the staff. But we see at 8.0 to 10, it was also the highest rated measure out of all our key drivers of satisfaction. So it's performing extremely well. The impact of the staff, though, has diminished slightly. Key drivers of, I'll say that staff are identified as competent, friendly. They're, sorry, I've got these written out. They're competent, friendly, fair, and they're courteous. But the areas where staff can improve are in the empathetic elements of service delivery. Taking the time to understand clients' needs, making an effort to ensure clients get what they need, and showing clients they care about their situation. These are areas where improvement will have the most dramatic effect on satisfaction with staff overall. I'm going to quickly highlight some results from the business survey as well. So we didn't just interview members of the general public or those who had accessed specific regional services. We also interviewed businesses within the region, both general as well as those that received public inspections, public health inspections, bylaw inspections, and so on. When we spoke to businesses, the most impactful area on their overall satisfaction with regional government was the effectiveness of their interactions with the Region of Peel, which again, this is an intuitive result, but sometimes getting intuitive results are the most valuable because they're confirming things that we already know. So when I say effectiveness of business to region interactions, this is ability to find information about regulations and bylaws, the things that you guys have spent quite a bit of time talking about already today, as well as feeling like they get good value for the tax dollars. This was less important in the previous wave of the study, and like we saw with Channel, it's moved up and become more important this wave. Those that received an inspection, whether it be public health or bylaw inspection, that's the second key driver of their satisfaction with the regional government. And then we see service quality and access, channel access experiences, still important drivers, but not key drivers as key drivers, the effective interactions with the business. Now these break down differently for different types of businesses. For businesses from the general population as well as those receiving public health and bylaw inspections, the ease of accessing information about regulations is an area that is performing well, that's something that you want to proactively maintain. And similarly, something that's performing well for those providing early learning childcare services, as well as social housing providers, is their ease of accessing information about bylaws. Now, there was one area for priority improvement for a certain subset of businesses, those receiving public health inspections, where they perceived value of the services they receive for tax dollars is an area where there's lower satisfaction and high impact on their overall satisfaction with regional government. Now, this is a difficult thing to address. It's very high level. And not something that's necessarily actionable, but there are certainly processes to feed into this that we've considered in the longer reports that we've issued the region, where ways that this can be improved. And finally, perceptions that policies and regulations contribute to a level playing field was also an area of improvement for public businesses that receive public health inspections. And that brings an end to the material that I'm here to present now. Happy to answer, though, any questions that you have based on the report that's in front of you, and thank you very much for your time.
Actually, Councillor Fonseca, if I may, just in accordance with our procedural bylaw, in case we run past 3:30, I just need a mover and a seconder, moved by Moved by Councillor Toby, seconded by Mayor Thompson, that in accordance with procedural bylaw 100-20-12, as amended, section 3-2 bracket M be waived in order that the April 28, 2016 Regional Council meeting continue past 3:30. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation. I do have some councillors on the board. Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. First of all, congratulations, CEO, Mr. Schwark. It really shows what I think you really epitomize customer service, and congratulations to regional staff for an excellent work. I guess a couple of questions that I have. One would be understanding its multi-channel service delivery. What would be the most effective considering cost? So if we looked at the different channels, and I'm not sure if you have this information, but it'd be interesting to see from the different channels of service, if we incorporated cost, what would be the most effective? And if there's a way that we'd be able to rank them accordingly. Just for us to understand when it comes to budget purposes, what's the most effective communication or most effective customer service channel for the residents?
I can give, we don't have budget line items for the different different channels, so I can't answer that specifically.
Understandably, but maybe in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I may,
Gilbert, yeah.
through you, Mrs. Chair. So if we look at the previous report, actually, I can refer, there's some of the stats or the information that you're looking for. So when we look at digital self-service, this is a recent study that was done in the UK in 2013. It is 20 times less expensive to deliver self-service through digital channel than it is through the phone, 30 times less expensive than through the mail, and 50 times less expensive through in-person service. So that helps, obviously, if you can drive as much self-service through the digital channel, it is a lot cheaper. But also, as importantly, if that service is available, if you look at even from the client's survey perspective, if that service is available or accessible to the resident, the client satisfaction would also be greater because they will be able to consume that service a lot faster than if they were to wait on the phone for somebody to answer or to go in person.
Sure. No, thank you, because it's interesting when you hear in person, sometimes you hear from residents the frustrations they have with the different systems. But when you look at the customer satisfaction, it's very comparable. And if we start incorporating the cost effectiveness, then, driving it towards more self-service really seems to be the trend. I guess the second question I have is regarding any comparative stats with similar sort of administrations, so second tier or other regional governments, what their customer satisfaction may be. I wouldn't directly compare it with municipalities, sort of city municipalities, just because I'm not sure, because of the service delivery is different. We're dealing about different services, but I guess similar administrations. I'm not sure if you have any information.
So is this referring specifically to services, or again with the channels?
Within the channels.
Within the channels.
Yeah.
So I don't have that information on hand, but I can tell you for satisfaction with service delivery, scores are comparable, if not higher, than other similar municipalities. Yeah. So in that regard, I mean, this is kind of taking into account that likely mechanisms of service delivery are similar, so the channels that they would use to access are similar. Considering that the level to which that drives satisfaction, those factors would be baked into those similar scores or lower scores in other municipalities, but it's not something I can directly compare for you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, Martin, or Councillor Medeiros, also our CAO wanted to make a comment on that.
If I could just direct council to 7.5-3, there's a table 1, compares Peel's survey results to the results of the National Citizens First survey, and that one's been run 7 times, as you can see, Citizens First 7. And so you see we are comparable and better scores in many areas, and in 3 of the areas where there's asterisks, Region of Peel is actually best in class.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Toby?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, given our CEO, I would expect we would be best in class on every one of those line items, okay? Yeah, you're in charge, though, David. You're doing a great job. Yeah, a couple of quick things. It's quite interesting that only 11% of the respondents didn't use internet, because I typically hear anyway that that's much more. There was 4,000 people polled. I'm not surprised that the miscommunication and different stories is really the big driver of dissatisfaction, because we around the table here, we hear that all the time. Oh, I phoned the city, they gave me one story. I phoned the region, they gave me another story. So how many of the people that you surveyed actually understood what services the municipalities had and what services the region had? Like, how did you break that out for people so that they were clearly talking about regional services?
So quite a few of the services that we were asking residents about, we got client lists from the different departments of people who had received a service.
Oh, okay, good.
So they were quite clear on the service they'd received, whether it's Healthy Babies, Healthy Children, Breastfeeding Companion, Breastfeeding Clinic. They were quite clear on the regional services.
Yeah,
The
so
one-
you were...
Oh, sorry.
So you were asking them about specific regional services. It wasn't a general question. Okay.
And so that was the listed sample. We also had general population sample. For the general population sample, the only service where there may have been, and I'll explain how we mitigated this, there may have been a misunderstanding about what was municipally run versus other jurisdictions, was regional roads. But we asked them whether or not they knew what a regional road was, not giving them options to respond, but asking for an open-ended comment. And if their answer didn't match the definition of what a regional road was, we explained it to them and provided them with a list of the regional roads. So that's how we mitigated that. In terms of the other services that they received, quite clear that they were regional services and only offered by the region. So there wasn't a large chance of misconception.
Yeah, that's great. I understand that. I'm a little surprised, though, that you didn't put Twitter on this, to be honest with you. No, seriously, like we have with the Hanlon Feeder Main, we have our own Hanlon Feeder Main Twitter feed, and it's been really, really effective. Chris and I can certainly speak to that. It's been an incredibly effective way to get instant messages out to our communities and to answer things back. And of course, the guys that are running the Twitter feed at Hanlon, they're right on it. So it'd be interesting maybe next time we do this to find out what sort of an impact that's having on customer satisfaction, if you will.
Well, I actually have 2 points. We did ask them about social media, including Twitter and Facebook, regarding disseminating traffic information. And so that was something that was people that responded to the survey were quite interested in, is having information about traffic or delays, things of that nature, construction. That was a channel that they were quite interested in receiving that information over. And also we did have an option for when we're asking the channel that they use to access their most recent service, we had an other option. So people that most recently used Twitter, for instance, had the option to say, well, the last time I interacted was over Twitter if I had a complaint or an issue, to do it that way. And we didn't see a big uptake there, but it's certainly something to consider in the next wave of the survey.
So you didn't actually track any of those specific numbers?
No, we have them. It was just so low incidence that we weren't able to do any real
sort of analysis.
Statistical analysis. So even too low for mean scores, which is usually a base size of 10.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor Thompson.
Yeah, your 11%, you said respondents did not have access. Is that to a computer or just lousy internet service? Like, I just want to know what that comparison is.
Yeah, it was that they don't have access to the internet at school, at home, at work, anywhere. So they don't have access to the internet on a regular basis.
How much was that Caledon? I know Malton has some challenges too, but
I don't have the breakdown there, but I'm happy to get it for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll be curious just to see what that is. We're going through a SWIFT program right now, trying to fix that quickly. But I was just curious on certain areas and what pocket areas there are, because I know we've got challenges all through the region, just not Caledon.
Yeah.
As much as I said it was, I'm starting to learn real quick. Not. But having said that, I was just curious what that meant.
I can tell you that we have an online option to respond to the survey. So these surveys, we initiate with a letter. We include the URL to the survey. If they want to just get out ahead of things and complete it online, they can do that. When we call them, if they're busy, we also offer to email them a link to the survey. And so the online uptake wasn't any different for the survey from within the municipalities. So we saw proportionally the same number of Caledon residents doing the survey online. It doesn't speak to the access to internet. That's something that I can quite quickly run a crosstab and provide.
The other thing is user-friendly on the internet. Now, I know we've made a lot of improvements, and has that helped, over the years, especially online? Because I know when people got on, they said it's so confusing, especially people that are not computer inept, find that they get on and they get halfway through the survey and say, now what do I do? And I know Peel's worked extremely hard to improve that, and I'm just saying, have you noticed comparisons from year to year on that?
I have, and I have that here, if you'll bear with me for just a second. Yeah, so it's right here. For the website proper, the two areas were where satisfaction was the highest and that had the greatest impact were it was easy to find the right website and it was easy to find the information that I needed. These are areas, again, as I was mentioning, areas for proactive maintenance, things that you're doing well, and these our analysis bore out for the region as a whole that the website, they're finding the website easily and they're finding the information they need as well.
Okay.
And I know there's, just as a slight aside to that, I know that the waste management website has undergone quite a large revamp over the last, recently, before the survey was administered, but recently. And those that we had a question about whether or not people had used the waste management website, which has been revamped. And when we look at how satisfied they were with the website overall, their score was 7.9 versus about 7.5 for residents that hadn't visited the waste management website. So things are good, and the revamp seemed to be moving things in an even more positive direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Mayor Thompson, would you like to move the presentation?
Absolutely.
So moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Medeiros. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then moving the report, moved by Councillor Tovey, seconded by Councillor Starr. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. On to 7.6 is the April 7th Audit and Risk Committee report. Moved by Councillor Starr, seconded by Councillor Ross. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Item 7.7 is the April 7th Report of Procedure Bylaw Review Committee. Moved by Councillor Medeiros, seconded by Councillor McFadden. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. 7.8 is the March 31st report from the regional clerk with regards to the Governance Review Task Force meeting. Moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Mayor Jeffrey. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And now, are we going back, Mr. Chair, to item 7.2 in camera?
We'll continue with the agenda and then,
Okay,
yeah.
so back to you.
Thank you. Items related to Public Works. Councillor Starr, if you chair this section, please.
Okay, the first item is 8.1, is the environmental assessment at Groves Corners. Councillor Groves. Moving it? Moving it. Seconded by Mayor Thompson. All in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Okay. 8.2 is the travel time study, high occupancy vehicle for information. Any questions? Moved by Mayor Crombie, seconded by...
Question, Ron Starr.
You had enough to say today. Councillor Parrish.
You're over your limit.
I'm telling your mother.
You're limited.
All in favor?
Hey.
Councillor Parrish.
Okay, I just want to know, please, through you, Mr. Chairman, at what point do we hit the maximum conversion on carpooling? Or do we just keep going on with these extra lanes that make everybody else angry? Is there a point at which it levels off and you don't pick up any more carpoolers? I seem to be asking all the wrong questions today.
Is there an answer to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the intent of the HOV lanes, and if you look at some of the stats in the report, I think it was from California, you can see that the lanes are less congested, so they move faster, but they also move significantly more people. To answer the specific question, I think the end would be when cars are basically running at full capacity. And when you look at the number of people that are in the average car, it's somewhere around 1.2 people per car. So, well, we're, there may be an end to it. There's a long way to go.
Okay, I've had I get complaints every once in a while, just from random people saying it annoys them in heavy traffic to watch the other guys go whipping by and the lane's empty, and if they could just whip in there for a minute, they'd get to work faster. So at some point, you've got to be able to explain it to them, so I was hoping you could help me with that.
Yeah, no, through you, Mr. Chair, we experience the same sort of things at a personal level. The real purpose, if I was explaining it to a resident, the real purpose behind those lanes is behavior change. And the idea is when you look at, say, our long-range transportation plan or the provinces, we can't build our way out of congestion. We can build some extra capacity through road construction or transit. But at the end of the day, the capacity, the building of capacity will not keep up with the anticipated growth through places to grow. So we'll have to look at really every option that we can to create more efficiency by either utilizing the capacity we have, so utilizing the network that we have better, or managing demand. And this is just one tool to change behavior to allow better utilization of the infrastructure we have and hopefully move sort of the broader community more efficiently. But I take your point, and it is a frustration for some people.
Okay, and I have some questions on 8.4, so I'll wait till then. Thank you.
If I could, just to add to that, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor's point, the minister is actually looking at opening HOV lanes to single occupancy.
But you pay for it.
By paying for it.
So the rich get faster, and the poor sit there idling.
Well, the idea being if you get those people out, there's more capacity on the other lanes for them to move forward. But that is a provincial issue, and the funding to be basically rolled back into infrastructure.
No, hey, I'm willing to pay. Thank you.
On that note, will you move that? Councillor Parish, you're moving that?
I would love
to. Okay, and seconded by Councillor Palashi. All in favor? Been carried. 8.3 is the engineering services up in Caledon, moved by Councillor Shaughnessy and Councillor Downey. All in favor? No questions. Okay, 8.4, Councillor Parish.
You knew. This is an interesting study. I've had staff give me the number of trucks that go along Derry and go along Airport Road. It's horrendous. And actually, at our city was just told that it's possible to get one of those electronic signs put in for free on the corner of Goreway and Derry, because we have more than 19,000 vehicles go by it every 8 hours. So the sign company wants to put it up, an electronic sign for us on the arena there. Have we ever considered, and I know I've brought this up before and I can't remember what you said, putting a truck-only lane on Derry to try and get all those giant tractor trailers into one lane and jam them there? Is that Department of Highways, or can we do that?
I think we have the ability to do it. The challenge, we've looked at, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, we've looked at options for truck-only lanes, and the challenge logistically is how do you enforce it, because, you know, at the end of the day, there's reasons on highways it's relatively simple to do it, but on arterial road where you have vehicles turning right, turning left, and going forward, there's always reasons for some trucks to be in any one of the lanes. It is something that we're actively looking at through the long-range transportation update, but the challenge we've always come to is it's very, very difficult to enforce, because there is a logic at times for vehicles to be in any of the 3 lanes.
Yes, I understand that, and I guess that wouldn't be any more difficult to enforce than the HOV lanes. You don't see a lot of people out there checking them out. Those transport trucks going along Derry, a lot of them are going into FedEx, a lot of them are going to UPS, so I understand if they're, depending on which way they're going to cross at an intersection. But it's just, it's a zoo up there. And the only solution I can think of is to try and keep all the trucks in one lane.
That's our TOCP for goods movement.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let us take that back. We are doing, there is a
Just
term
have
of
a look at
council
it.
priority for goods movement, and the focus is more around community. So that's not necessarily that it's a truck-only lane, it's that you'd prohibit trucks from the other lanes.
Right.
Right?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, you must have slipped in there. Councillor Rass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, for Exhibit 1 on page 2, the Peel Commercial Vehicle Data Collection Sites, those were chosen presumably because we know anecdotally that they're the heaviest truck traffic locations in the region?
Through you, Mr. Chair, generally speaking, yes, we did try to capture movements in all different communities so you get a broad spectrum of Peel. But generally speaking, we looked at the largest generators throughout the community.
Now, you may not be able to answer this question. It might be more directed towards Dr. Davila. Would it be possible, if we have data collection sites, to also include air quality monitors in those areas if we know they're a higher location for vehicular traffic to collect, regular air quality data, PMs?
So through the chair, in respect of air quality monitoring for, that which exists in the ambient air, that's actually under the purview of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So a request could go to the local office of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change outlining the nature of air quality testing that's being requested.
Can I provide staff direction to have those conversations to take a look at that?
Right. That's your purview, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Ross. All in favor? Carried. 8.5, public meeting for Yon Ning Market. Moved by Councillor Tovey, seconded by Councillor Kovac. All in favor? Carried. No question? Councillor Parish?
Yes, on page 8.5-14, it talks about area bounded by the east side of Gorway Drive, which is where Westwood Mall is. And they also just put in 229 condo units that are like an indoor bazaar. They're quite small, 10 by 10s. According to this, can they stay open on statutory holidays? Just the condo part.
I'd have to get back to you.
Because it says flea market, so I'm suggesting that's what it looks like. I don't know who the heck ever approved it, but it's there now. And it's a 2 or 3 story section that's condoized, and it's got 10 by 10 glass cubicles all the way through it, and it's like a flea market.
Okay, I'd
Okay.
have to get back in detail.
I wasn't here.
Councillor Parish, you done? Okay. Mayor Crombie.
Thank you, Councillor Starr. So it is a requirement for Young Ming Supermarket to come forward to ask for this exemption, correct? Because I thought we had discussed that, we were such a diverse community and we would honor people celebrating other occasions and.
This has been ongoing since 2014.
And we can't.
So it's going. I know it's going for the public meeting, which is a statutory requirement, and they've got all their paperwork done now. And
So it'll be perfunctory for us because we understand that people celebrate different holidays and we have to take that under consideration. But they still have to come forward and make their. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I can support it. Thank
okay.
you.
I think I had Councillor Tovey and Councillor Kovac. All in favor? Carried. And I think we had one piece of correspondence from Shauna Denton from City of Brampton. Receipt recommended. Anybody on there? Councillor Palashi.
Thank you very much. Just through the chairs to staff, I was just wondering if we've heard from the Minister's office about the GTA West corridor and if we know at what point they were going to send comments. They did indicate that they were coming back in the spring. It is the spring. Ish. Spring-ish. Till June the 21st, yes.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I don't have specifics, but I do understand the chair and the mayors are meeting with the minister next week. On Monday. So there may be some feedback from that, but there is no public feedback from the minister's office. Spring goes to the end of June.
Okay, and I'm glad that they are meeting with them. From my understanding, though, they were, the Minister Del Duca was in a press conference not too long ago, and a question came up with regards to the GTA West corridor and when he'd be commenting on that. And from what I've heard, his reply was he will not be commenting on it until the provincial environmental review was complete, and that review will be complete in the fall. So maybe can we reach out and find out?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, in our conversations with ministry staff, they refer us to the minister, and the minister is not going to talk to us, hasn't. He'll come out, and I guess we'll get some feedback from the chair and the mayors on Monday as to what possibilities will come through.
I'm sure we will. It's just from his comment that he will not be commenting. Does that mean that he won't be commenting on it to the press, or he will not even talk to you about it when the three of you go? That's what I kind of.
We'll follow up. Obviously, it's a big file for us. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, if he wasn't going to talk to us, I don't think we'd have a meeting. But
Mayor Crombie?
Mayor Crombie.
Thank you. So I asked him point blank recently at an announcement he made in Mississauga, and he indicated it would be closer to the fall. So I think that after the EP announcement.
Okay. Anyone else? Moved by Councillor Paleshi, second by Councillor Moore. All in favor? Carried. Another wonderful group of items. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We've dealt with health, human services, other business. Notice of motions, none. There is a bylaw moved by Mayor Crombie, seconded by Councillor Sato, that the bylaw listed on the Regional Council agenda being bylaw 30-2016 be given the required number of readings, taken as read, signed by the regional chair and the regional clerk, and the corporate seal be affixed thereto. And that's in relation to the water pipe smoking in the regional municipality appeal to regulate. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Request by Councillor Parrish to move into camera. I'm assuming, or certainly it's in relation to its labor relations or employee, so it would fall under that category to permit us to go into camera. Is that correct? Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So you'd move us in camera, seconded by Councillor Raz. All in favor? Carried. I'd ask that we clear the chambers except for those involved with respect to this item. Yeah, Carla, you're on this, so yeah.